Scotland and Northern Ireland, however, sees the cloud thickening and outbreaks of rain moving in. Mostly light and patchy for western Scotland, and for much of Saturday it's largely dry away from higher parts of western and central Scotland, but it will be cloudy. England and Wales, meanwhile, some decent spells of sunshine and light winds, allowing temperatures to reach 17 to 19 Celsius.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Friday the 13th of September. I'm Tom Harwood.
Don't know what that was about.
13?
I don't really got that.
Left out in the cold. Breaking this hour, the Prime Minister has denied his government is dishing out a punishment beating to pensioners, but refuses to rule out scrapping the single-person council tax discount. Now, this could impact millions of older people.
It's being coined the widow tax if it goes ahead. And war with Russia. Vladimir Putin warns if Britain and America allow Ukraine to use their weapons on Russian soil, this would spark a war on the West. The Prime Minister is in Washington, D.C. as we speak. Watch this space.
Contributing or taking out. The Office for Budget Responsibility says that low-paid migrant workers are actually a net negative for the public purse, costing taxpayers more than £150,000 each in state subsidies by the time they hit state pension age.
Yes, and more Labour nanny state junk food adverts will be banned on social media and television next year in the first of a raft of tough public health measures Sir Keir Starmer says are essential to save the NHS.
Well, famously, Friday the 13th is a spooky day, and I'm afraid we've got some spooky news for you in that the government is yet again refusing to rule out more tax hikes.
Is this a comedy sketch, Tom?
No.
It's a comedy sketch. This is a very serious
Friday
news
the 13th.
show. It is Friday the 13th, so hold on to your hats.
I'm not wearing one.
Anyway, I'm worried about this council tax exemption.
Yeah.
Now, they have so far refused to rule out scrapping this. So at the moment, if you're a single household, you get 25% off. Now, unsurprisingly, a lot of the people who are living in single households are pensioners, widows, widowers, people who are just living alone, single households, people who probably don't have the highest of income. So this would batter those older people again.
It's a pretty extraordinary thing because, of course, we remember during the election campaign, the Shadow Chancellor then, now the Chancellor, said again and again, no tax hikes on working people, and spelled out all of the different taxes that they would not raise. Well, given that they have such history now of ruling out tax rises, our ears have to prick up when they refuse to rule out a tax hike. So we're going to have much, much more on this throughout the show. It's a bit of a scoop in terms of what's probably going to happen in that budget in October. But we want your say on all of it too. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved.
Yes, would you be impacted by that single household council tax, scrappage of that 25% discount? It's going to affect a lot of people, millions of people, if it happens. But first, the headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. It is just coming up to 4 minutes past 12. The top stories from the newsroom this lunchtime, and we'll start with some breaking news coming to us out of Rotherham this afternoon. The first four of 7 men have been sentenced for child sex abuse offences against teenage girls in Rotherham. We have heard that Mohammed Amr, 42-year-old, has been sentenced to 14 years in prison. Yasser Ajib, 39 years old, 6 years behind bars. Mohammed Zamir Zadik, 15 years. And Mohammed Saeeb, 25 years in prison. Today's sentencing is the result of a 5-year investigation by the National Crime Agency as part of Operation Stovewood, which remains the single largest investigation of its kind in the UK, with more than 1,150 victims potentially identified. We are hearing that the court is now taking a short break before the remaining 3 of those 7 suspects are sentenced, and we'll bring you more on that with our reporter Charlie Peters later this hour. In other news, Russia's claims against 6 British diplomats of espionage and sabotage are completely baseless, according to the Foreign Office. The FSB security service claims the diplomats' actions prompted that response amid what it called numerous unfriendly steps by the UK. It comes as the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer meets President Joe Biden in Washington to discuss Ukraine's request to use Western weapons on Russian soil. But concerns over escalation have delayed the approval for Ukraine's use of those ballistic missiles. Our political correspondent Catherine Forster is in Washington, D.C. for us.
Volodymyr Zelensky has made it plain what further help he wants from the West. One of the things is the ability to use British and French-made Storm Shadow long-range cruise missiles and to send them into Russia itself. Now, that is something that up until now the US has been against. It sounds like that position is beginning to shift. We may hear a change in the coming days or weeks.
Catherine Forster there for us in Washington, D.C. Back here, what would have been the UK's first coal mine in 30 years is now in legal limbo as planning permission's been quashed today by the High Court. Climate campaigners had argued the decision to grant planning permission for the Whitehaven coal mine in Cumbria smacked of hypocrisy and said it contradicted the UK's climate commitments. The government had withdrawn its defence, but the developer, West Cumbria Mining, still contested the claim. However, in today's ruling, the judge said giving the go-ahead for the development was legally flawed. The prison population in England and Wales has dropped by over 2,000 in just 1 week following the start of the government's early release scheme. Today's figures are the first to be published since Labour's plans took effect, reducing the number of prisoners now to just over 86,000. That's down from a record of 88,521. Under the scheme implemented on Tuesday of this week, about 1,700 inmates were freed who had served 40% of their sentences. On October the 22nd, it will be the turn of those with sentences of 5 years or more. But the government insists it won't apply to the most serious offenders. Robert Jenrick, the leading candidate for the Conservative Party leadership, is proposing to drastically limit the number of migrants entering the country. The former immigration minister told our political editor Chris Hope that he wants to see a cap of just a few thousand people per year if the Conservatives win the next election.
He discussed what he called a more controlled and restrictive approach to immigration on Chopper's Political podcast.
Accept that what I'm arguing for will not be plain sailing. It requires a big change in our economy, in our public services, but it is the right thing to do.
It could get down to thousands, could it? Could it a net figure thousands?
Well, I think we'd have to give that careful thought. But my point is that it should be in the tens of thousands or lower.
In the US, Donald Trump says he's done debating and won't participate in another head-to-head before the November election, despite polls currently showing Kamala Harris won their first face-off. On Truth Social, Trump boasted about his performance, but several top Republicans said Harris came out on top. Over 67 million viewers tuned in for the debate, but Harris insists voters deserve a rematch, calling for another round. Here, assisted dying should be allowed, according to panels made up of members of the public. After 8 weeks of debate, a majority voted in favour. The top reasons for support were the need to stop pain and to allow a dignified death for the terminally ill. While 20 of the 28 jury members supported a change to the law, critics warn it could be misused and lead to reduced palliative care funding. The findings commissioned by the Nuffield Council on Bioethics could also influence upcoming parliamentary debates, with a bill expected to be heard in November. 2 men have been charged after a Banksy painting was stolen from a gallery in London. Larry Fraser and James Love were arrested and charged with burglary following the theft. The girl with balloon painting, which partially self-destructed during a £1.1 million auction, was recovered and will be returned to the gallery. It comes after Banksy artworks have recently faced a string of threats, with several pieces being moved for safekeeping. And the government has struck a £630 million deal to bring part of the National Grid's operations into public ownership. Launching on the 1st of October, the new National Energy System Operator will help drive the UK's transition to clean energy and strengthen energy security. Energy Secretary Ed Miliband's hailing the move as a milestone which he claims will position the UK as a clean energy superpower. The National Grid, though, said the final price could still change before the deal closes. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you for another roundup in around half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back. It is now 12:10, and the controversy around the government's plans to scrap winter fuel payments continues to heat up.
Now the Prime Minister is denying handing out a punishment beating to pensioners by taking the energy bill boost off around 10 million pensioners in the UK.
And following Sir Keir Starmer on his trip to the US capital is our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. She joins us now. Catherine, you've been following the Prime Minister around on his trip to DC. What exactly did you ask him and what did he say?
Yes, good afternoon, Tom and Emily, or good morning from Washington. It's 7 o'clock here. So the Prime Minister is in Washington. Very serious matters, of course, but a lot of the questions on the plane on the way over were about pensioners. Of course, the backlash to the cuts to winter fuel still going on. I asked him specifically about the single council tax discount if you live alone. And also I said to him, look, what's going on here? Are you effectively giving some sort of punishment beating to pensioners who largely, we know, tend not to vote Labour? And of course, many of them also voted for Brexit. To that, he said, no, absolutely not. But to the question of the single occupancy council tax discount, well, he was rather less clear. He said, look, the budget is on October the 30th. I'm not going to tell you now what's going to be in it. He said, you know, you wouldn't expect me to, which is fair enough. But, of course, the government do rule things out sometimes when it suits them. For instance, just the other day in our interview with our political editor, Christopher Hope, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, ruled out that they would get rid of, free bus travel or TV licenses, etc. So the fact that he won't rule it out, that does not, of course, mean that it's going to happen, but it certainly means that it might. And, you get a quarter off your council tax bill if you are the only adult living in the house. And we know that pensioners particularly often live alone because, quite often their husband or their wife may have died. So this is an important an important benefit for them. So understandably, many of them will be worried if that is the next thing that the government could potentially take from them.
Catherine, it is extraordinary, as you rightly say. The Chancellor, as I should say, has ruled out several benefit withdrawals, but the Prime Minister speaking to you overnight would not rule out a new tax, a 25% extra tax placed upon those who live alone. And of course, that will affect many, many pensioners if it happens, but it will also affect some working people, particularly people who might have just be living alone or might have had a loved one pass away. This could really become a very pernicious tax on working people, which goes against, if not the letter, the spirit of the Labour Party campaign, which of course promised to not raise taxes on working people.
Yes, it could. It could affect a lot of people and not only pensioners, as you say, Tom. And of course, the government said repeatedly before the last election, we have no plans to raise taxes on working people. Now, pardon me, they're able to say, look, we're not putting up income tax, national insurance, VAT. But we don't know, but we do suspect that they may be going to raise things like capital gains tax, inheritance tax, amongst other things, because they've made it clear that very difficult choices are coming. Now, there will be plenty of working people who pay capital gains tax and inheritance tax. So that working people phrase and that no plans was doing quite a lot of work, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Catherine, we are being inundated with messages from people who are worried about this change potentially in council tax for single households. Lots of people are going to be impacted on this, and they say this could cost them far more than the scrapping of the winter fuel payment. This will be a massive hit for people's income, disposable income, and for their lifestyles, of course. Now, you are in Washington, D.C., and there's been a huge amount of focus on Ukraine and also Russia. You've got the Kremlin claiming our diplomats are spies. You've got Putin threatening all-out war with Britain now. We're still awaiting a decision on whether these long-range missiles will be allowed for use on Russian soil. What's the latest?
Yes, well, it's a very delicate and very worrying situation here. Frankly, it's only 7 o'clock in the morning, but later on, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, will be heading to the White House. He'll be having, I understand, a sort of hour and a half meeting with the outgoing President, Joe Biden. Of course, after November the 5th, who knows who will be in charge in the US? Will it be the return of Donald Trump, or will it be Kamala Harris? Things could change for Ukraine and the United States foreign policy, very dramatically at that point. But in the meantime, the US and the UK really wanting to work very closely together on these very pressing challenges. Now, they're not going to only be discussing Ukraine, they're going to be talking about the Middle East, they're going to be talking about the Indo-Pacific, climate change and other matters, but certainly the situation in Ukraine absolutely top of the list. We had that joint visit, didn't we, from the Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who's here, and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Ukraine this week, where Volodymyr Zelensky made it plain they want permission to fire British, French-made Storm Shadow long-range cruise missiles into Russia itself. Now, for that to happen, they want the permission of the states, not just because they're our most important ally and they tend to sort of lead the world in the response. Also, some of the components, my understanding is, are made in the United States, and also they would need the use of United States radar systems to enable those weapons to be used effectively. But certainly a very clear and somber warning from Russia saying that that would mean that NATO countries are at war with Russia, and saying that Russia will take corresponding decisions based on the threat that would be created. So we have to hope that whatever decisions are made here in the coming days and weeks are the right ones for all of us.
An absolutely momentous visit. Catherine, thank you for being there for us. Of course, we'll be back with you throughout the programme as these meetings take place, as the news develops. Catherine Forster, thank you.
OK, well, joining us now is Defence and Foreign Affairs Editor at The Telegraph, Con Coughlin. Con, thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Big decisions to be made.
Yes, and long overdue in my estimation. We gave the Ukrainians the Storm Shadow missiles several months ago, but we haven't given them permission to use them. So, and in the meantime, the Russians are launching missiles from Russia at targets inside Ukraine. We've discovered this week that some of these missiles have been supplied by Iran, which is getting very close to Russia these days. And so the Ukrainians have every right to defend themselves by attacking these Russian bases that are used to attack Ukraine. And you know, the war is at a very finely balanced moment. And this could prove decisive if these permissions are given in turning the tide of the war in Ukraine's favour. So, you know, there's a lot to play for in Washington in the next couple of days.
It is extraordinary to see that Russia has these sort of missile launching sites in its own territory, fires at Ukrainian energy production, Ukrainian transport nodes, Ukrainian homes even. And the Ukrainians aren't allowed to hit back at them. It's almost as if the West has guaranteed Mr. Putin his own virtual Iron Dome.
Yeah, and this has been going on since the start of the conflict. I mean, first of all, we had the arguments about giving the Ukrainians tanks, then it was the F-16s, and now it's the missiles. And at every step, the Biden administration has been very hesitant because Joe Biden, the president, is worried about escalation. And every time Putin makes these threats about retaliation, Biden takes them seriously and holds back from giving Ukraine the weapons he wants. But as we've seen over the last 2.5 years, this is all bluster by Putin. He's threatened nuclear war and all sorts. But the fact is he's not going to do that. He's in a very difficult position. He's lost sovereign territory in Russia for the first time in the conflict. He's on the defensive. As I said, allowing the Ukrainians to use these missiles to strike deep inside Russia and neutralize these weapon systems that the Russians are using against Ukraine could be very, very decisive in turning the tide of the war. And I think the Biden administration should get over its hesitancy, realize that Putin is just full of bluster, and give the Ukrainians the weapons they need to win this war, because winning this war for Ukraine is in NATO's interest. This will teach Putin a lesson and stop him from indulging in further acts of aggression in Europe.
Con, surely there are some people with reasonable concerns that by allowing the use of these British and American missiles in Russian soil that we will be escalating things, that there is now a threat of the West being perceived even more so as being a part of this war. Surely those concerns are reasonable.
Well, they are concerns. I don't agree with them. I think if British and American forces were firing the weapons against Russia, that would be a big escalation. But we have every right to give the Ukrainians weapons. Iran, as I said, is giving Russia weapons, as is North Korea, as is China. Lots of countries are supporting Russia. We are supporting Ukraine. And so long as it is the Ukrainian forces who are firing the weapons, I think that is entirely justifiable and the right thing to do.
Now, that's a key point, isn't it? You have to look to who's providing the weapons to Russia. Thank you very much indeed. Con Coughlin, Defence and Foreign Affairs Editor at The Telegraph. Great to speak to you as always.
Yeah, really, really interesting stuff. Yeah, I can sort of understand how, if you're the President of the United States and you're told that Mr. Putin is saber-rattling about nuclear war, and you're told it's a 0.5% chance that he'll do it, 99.5% chance he won't press the nuclear button, there's going to be part of you that thinks, am I going to be the guy that takes that risk? And how would I be remembered in history if it was the 0.5% chance that actually happened?
It's easy to say it's all bluster from Putin, but yes, there is always that what if question. But is it not the same thing, providing the weapons and allowing them to use the weapons as using the weapons ourselves?
Yeah, I think
is that not the same thing in Putin's eyes?
I think it is. It is clearly. I think it's very, very silly that we've given all these weapons that are long-range weapons, and we haven't said that they can be used for what they're meant to be used for. I think it seems inevitable that this decision will be reached this week, but we'll be back in DC as and when we know more.
We will indeed. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. We're hearing news about a potential alternative to the failed project of HS2, a low-speed railway. You're very excited about this one.
I love this. It's, we can't do high-speed rail in this country. Why don't we try some low-speed rail instead? More on that after this.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Angela, what have we got?
Hello, there's an awful lot, but I think the main interesting thing is that Prince Harry said a week or so, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, that he absolutely wasn't going to go to his uncle's funeral because there wasn't enough protection for him. His uncle, Lord Fellows, was married to Jane Spencer, who was Diana's sister, who was the most practical and helpful of the three children, the three girls, and she's done an awful lot for Harry. I thought it was just terrible. He wasn't going to go there, but he has been there. They didn't talk to William. William didn't talk to him. Did he get any protection? Who knows? And if he didn't, if he takes the government to court yet again, they would say, well, look, we managed without that, but we don't know about that. But also the paper, the magazine that does loads for Harry and Meghan, they were the ones who said he wasn't going, so they said what he wanted them to say.
He doesn't need any protection. I mean, how did he get there? Probably in a Bombardier private jet that gives off 60 times more carbon than anybody else.
Yes, well, we don't know about that. The good thing was that he was there, and of course today is Remembrance Day for Diana, the day she died. So that he went there and he was with her side of the family, and I think that that's very good and might help him feel a bit better about things.
But neither of them are doing well out of it. William is not doing well out of it. Harry is not doing well out of it. The King is not doing well out of it. Meghan Markle's not doing well out of it. Why can't they just...
No, I don't think it's that easy. I think that they might do much worse if they were together again.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. It's 12:26. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, earlier in the show, we were discussing the fact that Keir Starmer has so far refused to rule out essentially taxing people more who live alone. This is the council tax exemption. You get a 25% discount at the moment. It affects lots of pensioners. Lots of people living on their own, widowers, just single people, single parents perhaps. Lots of people. I mean, Jones says, I'll be affected as an older person if the council tax discount is applied. I'm concerned also about young people who have strived to save for a mortgage. And now if they're on their own, they'll have a 25% increase. PW says, I live alone. It would be a big blow to my finances losing this. It's not fair that I have to pay the same as someone with a house full of people.
And Maureen has written in to say that she's a widow, saying that if Starmer does this, it's just another hit on pensioners. He's an absolute disgrace and not fit for office, is the word of Maureen. Heather says that she would be affected if they took away this single household discount, saying, I would not be able to afford to stay in my home. I think there is a particularly gendered aspect to this tax rise, I think. Generally, out of couples, it tends to be the husband that dies first in most cases. And for anyone who's reaching the later stages of life and has had the tragedy of losing a loved one, this is a hit. This is a hit on widows. This is a hit on single people. It's a hit on older people. It's a hit on vulnerable people.
It would be a widow tax. It would, absolutely. There are millions of pensioners who are living on their own currently, and sadly, a lot of pensioners can be quite lonely as well. We've got a loneliness epidemic as well. Lots of you getting in touch. There seems to be a sense that you just believe the Labour Party are going to choose to punish pensioners. And you say our homes will be next, says Susan.
It doesn't make sense. If you live alone, are you using as much bin services?
No.
Are you using the schools?
No.
Are you using the facilities to the extent that a household full of people are using?
Absolutely not. That's why there's a discount. Anyway, we move on. Keep your views coming in.
The government has unveiled a proposal to build a new 50-mile railway line as a slower and cheaper alternative to a scrapped section of HS2.
Well, this comes after a report commissioned by the mayors of Greater Manchester and the West Midlands found that a link between the Midlands and the North West is critical to enhance capacity for passengers.
Well, our reporter Jack Carson joins us now from Birmingham. Jack, what's the details of this proposal?
Well, this is the Midlands Northwest Rail Link. It's been proposed by a group of a private consortium led by Sir David Higgins, the infrastructure expert. It was commissioned, as you remember, after Rishi Sunak, the then Prime Minister, scrapped the second leg of HS2 at the Conservative Party conference. He said that £36 billion was going to be reinvested in different infrastructure, whether it's rail, whether it's road, to better connect the north as well. But Sir David Higgins, who's been part of this report, who's leading this consortium, has said that doing nothing in this corridor between Birmingham and Manchester, he says, is not a viable option from an economic or operational perspective. So this is a 50-mile rail link that is going to be slower than the planned HS2 second leg would be. It's going to run from just north here in Birmingham, from Lichfield, going to the southeast of Warrington in High Lee. And of course, this report was commissioned by the mayors of Andy Burnham and then Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street. He's tweeted to this morning, actually, as well, to say he's pleased that the connectivity work that he and Andy Burnham commissioned has come to fruition. He says the decision over HS2 North was always wrong, and so he hopes this case for a new railway line will be brought to life. In order to bring it to life, of course, it's going to need much of the funding. Now, the proposals for the funding is that the majority should be maximised from the private sector, and the report says with central and local governments partnering to try and fund the balance. Where they're trying to save costs is already using much of the land that's been bought up already for £2 billion by the HS2 Phase 2. It says it will roughly deliver 85% of the benefits of HS2 at 60 to 75% of the cost, with journeys expected to only take 15 minutes more than they would have done if that HS2 second leg had gone ahead. I've been speaking to people here in Birmingham High Street today, trying to get a bit of reaction as to whether this is something that they like something like the sound of. I actually met somebody from Manchester that had used the West Coast Main Line to get down today. He says he's supportive of this second line, he told me today, if it's cheap and if it doesn't cost the taxpayers too much money. I think that's the main thing here. If it's when it's up and running, it's affordable for people to actually use that link, as Sir David Higgins says, which would better economic prosperity within the Midlands and the North as well. Andy Burnham, of course, was part of the people that commissioned this report. He said that there's no way on God's earth that the current West Coast Main Line and the M6 can be relied upon for decades. And the new Mayor for the West Midlands, Labour's Richard Parker, says he's going to try and work on the government to get this done.
I think anyone who's travelled on the West Coast Main Line would probably agree with Andy Burnham's assessment there. It can be, frankly, it can be a bit rickety, but remarkable if this costs half as much as HS2 and half of that is covered by the private sector, not the government. I mean, by my quick maths, that's a quarter of the cost of the second leg of HS2.
As long as we, the taxpayer, don't have to take all the risk and all the overflow costs. Thank you, Jack. Jack Carson, you're in Birmingham. Thank you very much for reporting on the potential slow rail instead of the high-speed rail.
Only 15 minutes slower. I mean, if it connects up to I think it could be a good thing.
It could be a good thing.
I think it could be.
Well, we need some more capacity, don't we? Anyway, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. And now get this, apparently low-skilled workers or low-skilled migrants are actually costing £150,000 each to the taxpayer. We'll reveal why after the news.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon to you. It's just after 33 minutes past 12. We'll start with the breaking news we brought you in the last half hour or so from South Yorkshire, that the first 4 of 7 men have been sentenced for child sex abuse offences against teenage girls in Rotherham. Today's sentencing is the result of a 5-year-long investigation by the National Crime Agency as part of Operation Stovewood. It remains the single largest investigation of its kind in the UK, with more than 1,150 potential victims identified. The court are now taking a short break before the remaining 3 suspects are sentenced, and we will, of course, bring you the latest lines from that sentencing with our reporter Charlie Peters later this afternoon. In other news, Russia's claims against 6 British diplomats of espionage and sabotage are completely baseless, according to the Foreign Office. The FSB security service claims the diplomats' actions prompted a response amid what it called numerous unfriendly steps by the UK. It comes as the Labour leader and Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer meets President Joe Biden in Washington to discuss Ukraine's request to use Western weapons on Russian soil. Concerns over escalation, though, have delayed the approval for Ukraine's use of the ballistic missiles. Our political correspondent Catherine Forster is currently in Washington, D.C. for us.
Volodymyr Zelensky has made it plain what further help he wants from the West. One of the things is the ability to use British and French-made Storm Shadow long-range cruise missiles and to send them into Russia itself. Now, that is something that up until now the US has been against. It sounds like that position is beginning to shift. We may hear a change in the coming days or weeks.
What would have been the UK's first coal mine in 30 years is now in legal limbo as planning permission's been quashed today by the High Court. Climate campaigners argued the decision to grant planning permission for the Whitehaven coal mine in Cumbria smacked of hypocrisy and said it contradicted the UK's climate commitments. The government had withdrawn its defence, but the developer West Cumbria Mining still contested the claim. However, in today's ruling, the judge said giving the go-ahead for the development was legally flawed. The prison population in England and Wales has dropped by over 2,000 in just 1 week following the start of the government's early release scheme. Today's figures are the first to be published since Labour's plans took effect, reducing the number of prisoners now to just over 86,000, down from a record of 88,521. Under the scheme implemented on Tuesday this week, about 1,700 inmates were freed. Assisted dying should be allowed in England, according to a panel made up of members of the public. After 8 weeks of debate, the top reasons for support were the need to stop pain and to allow a dignified death for the terminally ill. While 20 of the 28 jury members supported a law change, critics are warning it could be misused and lead to reduced palliative care funding. And in the US, Donald Trump says he's done with debating and won't participate in another head-to-head before the election, despite polls showing Kamala Harris won their first face-off. On Truth Social, Trump's boasted about his performance, but several top Republicans said Harris came out on top. Over 67 million viewers tuned in for the debate, but Harris insists voters deserve a rematch. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back at 1 o'clock with a full roundup.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a fine Friday for most of us. Sunny spells, still a few showers around, mostly across parts of Scotland, and perhaps some more prolonged rain turning up by the end of the day because of this frontal system moving in from the Atlantic. But for much of the UK, it's high pressure and sunny skies. The best of the sunshine will be across the Midlands into the south and southwest of England, South Wales, perhaps eastern England as well. Some cloud will build and 1 or 2 showers will develop, most especially for parts of Scotland. Thicker cloud turning up in the far northwest, the breeze picking up as well. It's a cool day out there after a chilly start. Some places were close to freezing first thing, but in any sunny spells with lighter winds compared with the last few days, feeling perfectly pleasant. And it's a decent end to the day for Scotland with plenty of sunny spells. 1 or 2 showers there for Orkney into the far northeast of the mainland, and the cloud thickening by this stage across the Western Isles into parts of western Northern Ireland as well. That's the frontal system I mentioned at the start. But otherwise, clear spells into the evening for much of England and Wales, the cloud tending to fizzle away. And under those clear skies overnight, temperatures will fall again fairly quickly. 1 or 2 mist and fog patches will form. And it's going to be another chilly night, unusually so for the time of year. You don't normally expect temperatures close to freezing overnight in the first half of September. But in main urban areas, I think temperatures will stay at 7 or 8 Celsius. Scotland and Northern Ireland, however, sees the cloud thickening and outbreaks of rain moving in, mostly light and patchy for western Scotland. And for much of Saturday, it's largely dry away from higher parts of western and central Scotland, but it will be cloudy. England and Wales, meanwhile, some decent spells of sunshine and light winds, allowing temperatures to reach 17 to 19 Celsius.
The latest GB News travel.
Westbound on the M62, there's a lane closure whilst a vehicle has a tyre changed from Castleford through to Rothwell at 30. Clockwise on the M25, a lane closure and queue in traffic to a broken down lorry just after junction 26 for Waltham Abbey. Delays to the Holmesdale Tunnel and almost back to Enfield at junction 25. Clockwise on the M25, there's also long delays to recovery work after an accident from 11 at Chertsey through to junction 12. Delays to 3 miles before junction 10. Anti-clockwise on the M25, lane closure on the exit slip road to Godson, that's to a broken down van. Also for the anti-clockwise side of the M25, the exit slip road is currently closed at Potters Bar 24 due to recovery work following a broken down lorry. And that's your very latest travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 20 to 1, and low-skilled migrants are costing the UK taxpayer over £150,000 each over their lifetime. That's according to the new analysis from the Office for Budget Responsibility.
I think that's just before they turn state pension age. Anyway, the report has intensified the debate over immigration policy as the government faces rising pressure to reduce the number of low-paid migrant workers.
Joining us is the Research Director from the Centre for Migration Control, Robert Bates. Robert, this is a pretty stark chart when you look at it there in black and white. As soon as a low-income migrant comes to the UK, they start costing the taxpayer money rather than contributing.
Yeah, so this is something that a lot of us have been highlighting for a very long time, that the UK's current migration system is overwhelmingly skewed towards those that are low income, that are earning less than is needed to make a positive contribution to the Treasury. The OBR has actually for a very long time been one of the roadblocks for us having a meaningful debate about the costs of mass migration. It's clearly adopted a new methodology in this iteration of its report, and the results, as you say, are quite startling. 150,000 before people reach the state pension age, and that's, of course, excluding other key factors, such as the fact that many of these individuals are coming with dependents and family members and children and elderly relatives that impose an extra burden on the education system and on the healthcare system. It's also to say nothing of the remittances that are being sent abroad by those that come to the UK and work, which is around about 20 billion a year. And then let's also not forget that once an individual has spent 5 years in Britain, they're then eligible for a whole host of benefits. And, we saw a report a couple of weeks ago that showed that we're currently 1.69 million migrants that are either economically inactive or unemployed in the UK as well. So I would argue that this figure is actually underselling the scale of the problem.
I guess, Robert, the counter to what you're saying would be that low-skilled British workers as well will be costing the taxpayer a lot of money.
Well, yeah, but that's the nature of it. I mean, these are individuals that were born in the country. They are people that are part of our country and that we should be supporting. That doesn't therefore mean that we should be compounding the problem by bringing in those that make no economic contribution. I think that is absolute folly to go down that route. I mean, one of the arguments that we are always told is that migrants are needed in these low-skilled roles because Brits simply won't do the job. Well, when you look at the number of economically inactive Brits that we currently have in the UK, which is 9 million, I would argue that there's a lot more that needs to be done to get them into work and to alleviate the problem as well. Because let's not forget, for every migrant that's coming in and doing a low-skilled role, there's one Brit that might be potentially eligible for that role that's being displaced as well. So there's a whole secondary facet that we need to consider as well.
Now, looking at low-wage, low-skilled migrants, clearly a cost to the taxpayer, a significant cost. But the OBR also looked at the average migrant and the high-skilled, high-wage migrants. Now, very obviously, the high-skilled, high-wage migrants are a net contribution to the UK Treasury. But interestingly, for the average migrant, so I suppose this discounts those at the very top and those at the very bottom, they have to live to the age of 93 before they come a net drain on the UK Treasury. The average migrant is a net contributor right up until they live well beyond their life expectancy. Surely that suggests that there's a part of our migration system that is working.
Well, so this is where I would quibble with the OBR. I'd argue that the average migrant, you look at the cohorts that have been entering in 2021 through to 2023, and what we are seeing is fundamentally 70 to 80% of them are earning less than the Migration Advisory Committee's own report suggests they need to be earning to make a net contribution, which is around between £38,000 and £45,000 a year, depending on the number of dependents that they bring. So although the OBR's analysis of the costs of low-skilled migration seems to be moving in the right direction, there's still a lot more that needs to be done in our political establishment, in the quangos and in the Whitehall chambers that are making decisions around this policy to actually make them truly alert to the problems that we are facing with this mass migration experiment.
Well, it's good to have the transparency with these figures, at least, that the OBR is looking into this and providing us with data so we can make actual, informed opinions and hopefully informed policy decisions. Robert Bates, thank you very much indeed. You are the research director from the Centre for Migration Control. I mean, so apparently if you're a low-wage migrant worker, £150,000 you cost the taxpayer until you reach the pension age, £500,000 if you reach 80 years old, and £1 million plus if you reach 100.
It does show how much pensions cost.
Well, it does show how much pensions cost for sure, but it does just show the cost of public services. You have to have a pretty damn good wage if you're going to be a net contributor.
Although the average migrant is.
Yeah, well, we shall see. I don't know about that in recent years, though.
That's also due to the no recourse to public funds that recent migrants get. So there's a lot of state services that recent migrants can't get.
For 5 years.
Although, if they're an approved refugee, of course, they get that immediately.
Then there's the issue of dependence, though. There's the issue
also
of dependence. You may have lots of children once you come here. Who knows? Anyway, we've got lots more coming up on today's show. The nanny state, it's back in a big way. We'll reveal why.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
An army veteran has become the world's most tattooed woman after a 10-year journey to ink 99.98% of her body. I mean, that's really nearly everywhere. But I wonder, I mean, yes, she is unusual, and you'd know her if you met her, frankly, wouldn't you? But are tattoos acceptable they're becoming more and more acceptable just amongst all of us, aren't they? But what about in the workplace?
99.98% of her body tattooed. Do you think this would affect the way that she is received at work?
I do affect it would how she is seen at work, just purely because tattoos are still so stigmatised in the workplace. In today's rapidly evolving society, the traditional standards of what is socially acceptable are being redefined. Facial tattoos, full body tattoos, once stigmatised, are increasingly seen as a form of personal expression, and there shouldn't be a barrier to one's professional or social life.
If you are going for a job, for instance, we make up 90% of our minds about somebody within the first 3 seconds. And I have written a book on body language, and the face is just so important. You need to have the smile, you need to be able to read the facial expression, even when we're speaking. Now, if the face is really heavily tattooed, you can't do that.
Jade said that there is still this stigma, particularly to facial tattoos. We do judge people with tattoos, don't we?
We do. Unfortunately, we do, because it's not the norm. And as a human being, we tend to judge what is not the norm. And as Jade says, we are getting much more used to it. It is much more socially acceptable. But a lot of firms will say, if you've got a tattoo, you cover it. We don't want tattoos in the workplace.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, 12:49 is the time. Now, a landmark shift in public health policy is set to take effect next year. Labour's confirmed a watershed ban on junk food advertising before 9 o'clock, with online ads banned entirely.
Extraordinary. We can't make our own decisions now. The move marks the first in a series of measures aimed at tackling Britain's worsening health crisis and curbing soaring NHS spending, with Sir Keir Starmer pledging further preventative steps. Now, take these pictures in, enjoy them while you still can. What we're showing on your television screens will soon be illegal in this country. This is real pioneering broadcasting.
Yeah, we'll be taught that in history lessons. We'll be shown this. People will
You won't be able to see the pictures. You can't look at the donut. You're not allowed to see it.
Anyway, joining us now is former presenter of Fat Family, Steve Miller, who no longer looks at donuts, no longer consumes them. Of course you don't, Steve Miller. Steve, let me know what you make of this. Why 9 o'clock, firstly? Why is that the watershed?
Well, he obviously thinks that, you know, kids go to bed at 9 o'clock. I'm not sure about that. But, you know, we've got a Prime Minister here that actually should have his address changed to 10 Banning Street, because over the last few weeks we have had, seriously, what have we had? We've had the fuel allowance banned. We've had smoking in pub gardens banned. I had some sympathy with that. Takeaways near schools banned. Now we've got junk ads banned. What's he going to ban next? My sense of humour? I don't know. But the thing is, this I don't think is going to work, because from television, first of all, kids generally don't watch television these days. Traditionally, they're looking at TikTok, and they're on their games, they're on their apps. So I'm not sure it's going to have much power there. Secondly, we have to remember that parents are the power when it comes to children and their weight and their health. So what he shouldn't be doing is taking away that responsibility and blaming advertising in this case. And then the third thing is, you've got the whole environment. You've only got to go onto the street, and straight in front of you are shops selling sweets, chocolates, and so-called junk food. So no, I'm not a fan of this one. I don't think it'll work. I just don't, because the environment, we've got this obesogenic environment anyway. So I don't think Nanny needs to come out for this.
No, it is a remarkable list that you read out there at the top of all of these things that the government has banned. But of course, Keir Starmer might well be taking his cues from Sadiq Khan, who in London has already banned junk food adverts on the tube and on buses across Transport for London services.
But I feel skinnier already.
But here's the thing. I don't think London's any skinnier. And what's more peculiar is we had this example earlier this year of a comedian by the name of Ed Gamble, who was advertising his stand-up show.
I remember.
He wasn't advertising food. His stand-up show was called The Hot Diggity Dog Tour, and there was a picture of a hot dog. He wasn't allowed to show a hot dog on the advert. It wasn't even an advert for food. I mean, this is where we're going nationally now.
What did he change it to?
No, and this is what's concerning me a bit now, is that everything's about banning, and I don't know why. I feel like control is coming in. I feel like I'm being suffocated. I mean, Keir Starmer just seems bothered about banning, and rules.
But hang on,
rules.
Steve, you were pro the outdoor smoking ban.
Hang on. Yes, I was pro that one. I'll hold my hands up to that one, because I can't stand smoke in my face. Can you imagine Keir Starmer at a party? I mean, how excited would he be when he just wants to ban everything? I mean, it'd be so bored, it'd be like a funeral. Listen, this is not going to work. Britain needs to get real. What he needs to ban, I'll tell you what he needs to ban: fat acceptance. That's what he needs to ban. Going from the catwalk to the fat walk, all of that sort of stuff. That's what he needs to be saying. And he needs to be saying we have to be bolder when we're talking about weight and fat, like they do in Japan. Japan have an obesity rate of around 5%. Ours is in the mid-20s. And they don't hold back. They say it as it is. The danger here is we're losing straight talking. Coming back to this issue, though, no, I don't think it's going to work. Kids don't watch telly. They're on their games. They're out in the environment. They're going to see the sweets. They're going to see the burgers. They're going to smell the chips. And I tell you what, it won't affect anything. All it will do is potentially affect.
Well, Steve Miller, that's all we've got time for. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that. We'll be back, of course, next hour on Good Afternoon Britain with Ukraine and Russia. Are we in for World War III?
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome along to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. It's turned into a fine day for many of us. Dry, sunny spells. There is some rain turning up later, and that's because of this weather front coming along from the Atlantic, and it's going to push cloud and outbreaks of rain and a freshening breeze into the west of Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland. But for the vast majority, sunny spells through the rest of the afternoon into the early evening, and then any cloud that does appear through the day tends to fizzle out overnight for England and Wales. As a result, temperatures falling away once again. We've got relatively cold air in place, 1 or 2 mist and fog patches. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, the thicker cloud here, outbreaks of rain, mean that it won't be quite as chilly, 10 to 12 Celsius. Meanwhile, temperatures could be close to freezing in some parts of central and southern England and South Wales. But that's where we've got the best of the sunshine first thing. A beautiful start to the day. There'll be some high cloud around, but for much of England and Wales, what a cracking start to the weekend. Now, Cumbria, a bit more cloud, and certainly for Scotland and Northern Ireland, it is a cloudier start to the day. That means it's not going to be quite as chilly out there. Temperatures typically in the double figures, but it's fairly dreary over the Highlands, the Grampians, the southern uplands, a lot of low cloud, some patchy rain and drizzle. Brighter skies for the east of Scotland and certainly for much of England and Wales. We keep the dry and bright weather through the day, some areas of medium and high cloud around, but otherwise it's set fair. Western Scotland and Northern Ireland, increasingly breezy, increasingly damp, and as a result it's not going to feel very pleasant as the winds pick up. But further south, a slightly warmer day compared with Friday, highs of 18 to 19 Celsius. And we keep the fine weather in the south into Saturday night, but the weather front that's causing the damp weather in the northwest tends to sink south into northern England and parts of Wales by Sunday. To the north of that, some showers, and to the south, staying fine. Higher pressure next week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be good luck. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This Bank Holiday Monday, we'll be celebrating National Dog Day by uncovering how many pet owners would rather spend the bank holiday with their pet over their partner. In fact, new research has uncovered the 5 key personas that make up Generation Pet. That's a new wave of post-pandemic pet owners, with 58% saying they worry about their pet being diagnosed with a serious illness. Well, joining us now to tell us more about how we should be caring for our pampered pooches is Dr. Edwina Gildia.
Some of the interesting facts coming through that is that 80% of us think that pet as part of the family. The new pet owners who have come on board during the pandemic, there's a lot to learn with being a new pet owner. Interesting facts, as you mentioned, 1/3 of pet owners are preferring to spend time with their pet this weekend over their partner. 60% of pet owners, and dog owners specifically calling them out, say that their dog improves their mental health, and 55% noting that improves their physical health by getting out and about.
It's also about showing that love and appreciation for these animals which don't ask anything of us but love.
That was another point that came through this research that we did at Zoetis UK, is that they bring a purpose to life, and I think that's another thing to call out. It's so important for ourselves, for society, to have that purpose, but with that comes responsibility. And that's ensuring that we do support their health, and we know how to do that as well.
If you'd rather spend your bank holiday with your dog than your partner, maybe we've got too much of an over-reliance on our pets?
I think it depends on what way you look at it. For some people, it may be a connection. I think it's a positive thing that we have, and we should celebrate it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Friday, the 13th of September. I'm Emily Carver.
I'm Tom Harwood.
Left out in the cold, breaking this hour, the Prime Minister has denied that his government is dishing out a punishment beating to pensioners, but continues to refuse to rule out scrapping the single-person council tax discount, which could impact millions of older people.
War with Russia? Vladimir Putin warns Britain and America it could well face that situation if they allow Ukraine to use their weapons on Russian soil, saying it could spark a war on the West. The Prime Minister is in Washington, D.C. as we speak. Watch this space.
Yes, and the Royal Air Force. See what we've done there. Prince George is taking his first flying lesson at the young age of just 11. Didn't know that was allowed. He's following a long line of royal aviators, including his father, Prince William, and great-grandfather, Prince Philip.
"16-year-olds voting, 11-year-olds flying planes. What's this world coming to?"
Do you think he actually does it on his own?
I think it's probably going to be a simulator, isn't it?
Or maybe a simulator.
I think they stick you with theory for a little bit.
Or maybe, you know, in some planes you can do a little bit of the action, can't you, in the passenger seat?
I can't imagine, even if he's the heir to the throne, I can't imagine he'd be sitting up there in the cockpit of a real plane at the age of 11.
But what if they own all the land that he's doing it in? Then surely it's up to them, no?
I mean,
personal responsibility?
No, I think the aviation
the air belongs to us all.
would would probably have something to say about it. I don't know.
Well, we're going to be speaking to an expert on
Yeah,
this
let's
who can
find
tell us exactly why he's allowed to go on a flying lesson.
Get rid of all the other news. I mean, World War III, tax rises for pensioners. I mean, let's put all aside for one moment. I want an expert. I want to find out, can 11-year-olds fly planes in this country?
You just know there will be people who look at that headline and they're like, the privilege. The privilege. It's like, yes, he's privileged. He's a prince.
Yeah. Although I suppose at least with our privileged people, they tend to be, if they're in the royal family, there's sort of duties expected of them. Whereas if you look at the Kardashians, and I've got nothing against the Kardashians, but I don't know, I think they have perhaps less decorum
They've got
than
large
the royal
bottoms.
family. Goodness me, I haven't been looking. Well, much more to come in today's programme, and from everything from bottoms to aeroplanes, from tax rises for pensioners to the prospect of weapons being used on Russian soil. Do get in touch. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved.
It's your headlines.
Very good afternoon to you. It's just after 1 o'clock, the top story this lunchtime, and we start with some breaking news out of South Yorkshire, where 7 men have been jailed for over 100 years after what the judge there described as harrowing crimes against girls in Rotherham. We can take you live to our national reporter, Charlie Peters, who is outside Sheffield Crown Court for us. Charlie, today's sentencing coming at the end of a difficult and quite dramatic 9-week trial.
That's right, Sam, and a 5-year-long investigation by the National Crime Agency, with the judge here, Mr. Justice Slater, thanking the 2 victims as he wrapped up proceedings, handing down over 106 years in sentences to 7 defendants today. They are Mohammed Amar, 42, convicted of 2 counts of indecent assault, 16 years imprisonment. Yasser Ajaib, 1 count of indecent assault, 12 months on an extended licence and 6 years imprisonment. Mohammed Sadiq, 49, he was convicted of 1 count of rape and 1 count of sexual intercourse with a girl under 13. He was given 15 years imprisonment. Some members of his family seen crying and shaking their heads in the public gallery as that sentence was delivered. Mohammed Siab, convicted of 2 counts of rape and 1 count of sexual intercourse with a girl under 13 and a count of trafficking, was given 25 years imprisonment. He was described as a persistent and cruel sexual offender as the sentence was handed down, met with shock in the public gallery, those 25 years. And we had Adid Sadiq. He was convicted of 3 counts of rape and indecent assault, 24 years imprisonment. And Tahir Yassin, he was convicted of 8 counts of rape. He was given 13 years imprisonment. And Raman Barry, 37, the final defendant given after a break, convicted of 4 counts of rape on 2 separate occasions at a hotel. He was given 9 years of imprisonment. All of these sentences were observed by the 2 victims, with one of them also giving a very moving personal impact statement yesterday here at Sheffield Crown Court.
Charlie, thanks very much. Charlie Peters there live for us outside Sheffield Crown Court as that trial, 5 weeks in the making, 9 weeks in fact, comes to an end. We will hear more from Charlie, no doubt, throughout the rest of this afternoon. In other news, Russia is claiming that 6 British diplomats are guilty of espionage and sabotage, but the Foreign Office says that is completely baseless. The FSB claims the diplomats' actions prompted them to be expelled from Moscow amid what it called numerous unfriendly steps by the UK. It comes as the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is meeting with President Joe Biden in Washington, along with his Foreign Secretary David Lammy, to discuss Ukraine's request to use Western weapons on Russian soil. Concerns over escalation, though, have delayed approval for Ukraine's use of those ballistic missiles. Our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, is in Washington for us.
Volodymyr Zelensky has made it plain what further help he wants from the West. One of the things is the ability to use British and French-made Storm Shadow long-range cruise missiles and to send them into Russia itself. Now, that is something that up until now the US has been against. It sounds like that position is beginning to shift. We may hear a change in the coming days or weeks.
Here, what would have been the UK's first coal mine in 30 years is now in legal limbo as planning permissions being quashed by the High Court today. Climate campaigners had argued the decision to grant planning permission for the Whitehaven coal mine in Cumbria, they said, smacked of hypocrisy and contradicted the UK's climate commitments. The government had withdrawn its defence, but developer of West Cumbria Mining still contested the claim. However, in today's ruling, the judge said giving the go-ahead for the development was legally flawed. The prison population in England and Wales has dropped by over 2,000 in just 1 week following the start of the government's early release scheme. Today's figures are the first to be published since Labour's plans took effect on Tuesday, reducing the number of prisoners now to just over 86,000. That's down from a record of 88,521. Under the scheme implemented this week, about 1,700 inmates were freed who had served 40% of their sentence. And Robert Jenrick, the leading candidate for the Conservative Party leadership, is proposing to drastically limit the number of migrants entering the country. The former immigration minister told our political editor, Chris Hope, he wants to see a cap of just a few thousand people per year if the Conservatives win the next election. He discussed what he called a more controlled approach to immigration on Chopper's Political podcast.
I accept that what I'm arguing for will not be plain sailing. It requires a big change in our economy, in our public services, but it is the right thing to do.
It could get down to thousands, could it? Could it a net figure, thousands?
Well, I think we'd have to give that careful thought. But my point is that it should be in the tens of thousands or lower.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, plenty more on that breaking news from the Rotherham sentencing at Sheffield Crown Court later this hour. For now, though, back to Tom and Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
OK, it is now 1:09. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain, and we begin this hour with the controversy that's enveloping the government. Their plans to scrap winter fuel payments, it is all heating up. It's not going anywhere, is it, Tom?
Ironically. Now,
ironically, yes.
The Prime Minister is denying handing out a punishment beating to pensioners by taking the energy bill boost off around 10 million people receiving the state pension.
And following Sir Keir Starmer on his trip to the US is our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who joins us now. Catherine, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It is the morning over there. You've been following the Prime Minister on his big trip to the United States, and he's been asked many a question about the winter fuel payments and potential attacks on pensioners.
Yes, good afternoon, Tom and Emily. It's 8 o'clock in the morning here. Yes, the Prime Minister is here to talk about pressing global issues such as Ukraine, but a lot of the questions that we journalists asked him on the plane on the way over yesterday were about pensioners. The row about the winter fuel allowance goes on. It turns out that an impact assessment on the effect that that potentially could have on some pensioners has not been done by the government ahead of making this decision. And I asked him if basically the government were dishing out some sort of punishment beating to pensioners due to the fact that they tend not to vote Labour in very large numbers, and of course a lot of them voted for Brexit as well. Now he said no, absolutely not. But I also asked about the possibility of reassuring pensioners about another thing that might be in the firing line, and that is the single occupancy council tax discount that you get if you are a single adult living alone. You get 25% currently off your council tax bill. Now, for many people, that's quite a lot of money. And of course, lots of pensioners do live on their own. Often they've been bereaved, they've lost their husband or wife and are on their own for that reason. On that, he didn't give me a clear answer. He basically said, look, the budget is on October the 30th. I'm not going to preempt anything in that. He said, don't take it from this that, we're ruling it in or out. He's simply not going to say. So we don't know that it's going to happen, of course. But, a lot of pensioners, I think, very unhappy and very worried about how they're going to pay their fuel bills this winter. Of course, the government is saying so that 880,000 people not claiming pension credit, which would also entitle them to winter fuel allowance, get your application in, but also worried now about potential further hits to their incomes.
No, it really does seem like it's a stark time for many people. This will not be a happy budget, and it does really run against what the Labour Party was saying during the election campaign, that they would not be raising any more than the specific taxes that they said they would raise on private schools and on non-DOMs. It seems like we're a world away now from that, where they really are going to be raising taxes on ordinary people who, frankly, are not well off.
Well, yes, they said they had no plans. Of course, plans can change, can't they? And as they've said repeatedly, they say that they found that the public finances were dramatically worse than they had realised before. They talk repeatedly of this £22 billion black hole, they say, was left by the previous Conservative government. Worth pointing out that £9 billion of that is due to a choice that the government has made in awarding public sector workers above inflation pay rises, as recommended by the pay review bodies. But that is a choice that they have made. So, yeah, they said no plans, but plans have changed, it seems, and we are being prepared over and over again for a difficult day, I think, on October the 30th. Lots of potentially hard decisions, tax rises, spending cuts, etc. Rachel Reeves has said she's going to stick to very strict fiscal rules. They don't want to do anything that's going to scare the markets and make them look like they're irresponsible. But clearly a lot of pain to come.
Yes, and we have been inundated with people who are very worried about particularly this council tax exemption being scrapped, because that will add a huge amount to people's bills and cut down their disposable income quite dramatically. But you are in Washington for other reasons. There's a lot of talk about Ukraine and how to deal with Russia. You've got the Kremlin claiming our diplomats as spies and booting them out. You've got Putin threatening an all-out war with Britain if we allow these long-range missiles to be used on Russian soil. Where are we with it all?
Yes, very worrying noises off coming from Russia indeed. So the Prime Minister is here again in Washington. It's his second trip. He was here for the NATO summit shortly after he was elected. He's here for a meeting with the outgoing President Joe Biden. They will be meeting for about an hour and a half later on today. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, is in attendance. Tim Barrow, the National Security Advisor. We expect Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. Also, a meeting about shared global challenges. So, of course, largely Ukraine, also the Middle East, also the Indo-Pacific, but Ukraine absolutely top of the list because it's soon going to be coming into winter. They want to give Ukraine what it needs to try to gain some sort of advantage going into the winter. Worth saying that come November the 5th, when Joe Biden will no longer be president and either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris will take his place, things may change dramatically then. But at the moment, all the focus seems to be on Ukraine's request to fire Storm Shadow long-range cruise missiles directly into Russia to take out targets within Russia that Russia is using to attack Ukraine. Now, the US has previously been very firm on saying they will not support this, but it does seem to be shifting now. We asked the Prime Minister in detail on the plane yesterday about this. He does not want to go into any details, but clearly discussions are happening. I don't expect any announcement on that today. We've been told not to expect an announcement. Possible we might hear something at the United Nations General Assembly in a week or so, or perhaps more likely, we may know that permission has been given at the point that these weapons are actually used, because are you really going to want to signal to Russia, if you're going to use these missiles, are you really going to tell the world that you're about to do so?
I wonder if the decision has already been taken. Catherine Forster, live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for all of that. Joining us now is the retired British Army officer, Tim Cross. Tim, what's the balance here? Obviously, this has been a decision that the United Kingdom and United States hasn't taken until this point. What are they weighing up?
Well, there's obviously the issue of the politics to this, and some of that's just been covered in your correspondent. From a military point of view, let's be clear. There are three areas of a battlefield in the context of Ukraine. There's the close battle, which is what's going on at the front line, the fighting between individual soldiers, fighting in places like the Donbass, in Kursk, and so on. And that is obviously a crucial part of the ability to win a campaign. Behind that is the rear battle. And the rear battle is what's in place to enable those people in the close battle to conduct that fight. The logistics, the lines of communication, the industrial base, the critical national infrastructure, and so on. And then at the front of the close battle is the deep battle. And the deep battle is our ability to strike at the enemy's lines of communication, logistic bases, command and control centers, and so on, to disrupt what they're able to do to maintain and sustain their close battle. Now, thus far, Russia has been able to conduct operations in all three of those areas and has hit deeply into Ukraine, up to the western borders, Odessa, and so on and so forth. Now, when Putin says that, if we attack Russian soil with Storm Shadow and so on, then we need to be careful. But actually, we've been doing that. Crimea, Putin considers Crimea to be Russian soil, yet we've been using Storm Shadow against Crimea. And thus far, that's as much as the Western politicians have been prepared to allow Ukraine to use not just Storm Shadow, but other systems too. Now, if we do not allow Ukraine to fight into the Russian rear areas, into that deep battle, then I think Ukraine will continue to struggle. And, it's ridiculous not to allow them to do that. I mean, in the context of this, I've used the analysis of in 1940, the Americans gave us, or we bought from the Americans actually, a whole pile of stuff under Lend-Lease. We had to pay for it, and we didn't stop paying for it till a couple of decades ago. It was a huge amount of money. But when the Americans gave us that military capability in 1940, they didn't say, okay, here it all is, but you can't use it to attack Germany. I mean, it would have been a nonsense. And thus far, we have been constraining Ukraine from being able to conduct proper, operations. And this deep battle is important. So it's a balance between that military piece and I don't dismiss it out of hand, the politicians' concern of what Putin may or may not do if we decide to allow that to happen.
Well, this is the thing. We were hearing from Con Coughlin, who is the defence editor at The Telegraph. He said that it's all just bluster from Vladimir Putin, that he will not launch some kind of all-out war on the West, that we're not heading to World War III over this. But considering all of the military support that we have been giving Ukraine, from training their troops, giving them our expertise, our military expertise, to the billions in military aid and financial aid, I guess you may as well allow them to go the whole hog and use the missiles in Russian territory?
Well, clearly, I think so. What will Putin do about it? Well, we don't know. It's possible he could do anything. It ranges from, at the low end, continuing to use what we call the grey zone, cyber attacks, and so on, undersea cables that people talk about, and indeed arresting British citizens and holding them in jail and using them as a bargaining chip, which he's done with Americans in the past. And he could certainly do that, and is doing the cyber stuff day by day. As you move further up that spectrum, obviously what people are worried about is the extreme end of that, is the use of tactical nuclear weapons. But my own view is that Putin is not going to go that far. Now, he's a megalomaniac in many ways. We all know, trying to understand what he thinks and so on is really difficult. And there's no doubt that if we allow Ukraine to use Storm Shadow, to use Scalp, the French equivalent, to use ATACMS, to attack deep, and we're talking about 150, 165 miles deep into Russia, that will change the dynamic, and it will put him under more pressure. There's no doubt about that. But, will he seriously take on NATO in a military sense? I don't think he will, but I do think he will use some of that lower end spectrum stuff. So my own view is we should give Ukraine the ability to do this. This thing is going to drag on anyway, I think, for quite a long time to come. But if Ukraine are going to be in a position, in any position, to retake some of this lost territory, to end up in a negotiated position where they've got some strength on that table, we've got to enable them to conduct this deep battle.
Well, Tim Cross, retired British Army officer, really appreciate your perspective on this issue. It's a very, very serious one indeed.
There's no denying that people are nervous about this, though. It's one thing helping with military aid, it's one thing training troops, but allowing missiles, British-made missiles, to be used, perhaps it is, worrying.
As Tim says, Russia attacks us every day.
Yeah.
We've seen all of the cyber attacks.
Yeah.
We don't know how many of them are directly attributable to Russia, but we know the NHS has been attacked. We also know that people have been killed on British soil using nerve agents.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
That was before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin was already killing people in this country. So I don't know. I mean, if he's already gone that far, how much further would he actually go?
Yeah, let us know your thoughts. I'm interested to know what you think at home. Would you support the use of these British long-range missiles on Russian territory, or do you think it's a step too far? Let us know. gbnews.com/your say. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. It turns out, after all of this speculation, that the government didn't actually do an impact assessment into how cutting winter fuel payments would impact pensioners. Go figure.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Cup Classique, previously known as Méthode Cup Classique, is South Africa's answer to the famous French fizz.
They basically have to be made in South Africa and also by the traditional method. So it's exactly the same method as champagne, but is it made in a different place. So they can't call it champagne because it's not made in Champagne, but it's very similar.
And on the other hand, in Prosecco, it all happens in a sort of great vat.
Yes,
doesn't it?
Yes.
Which is why Prosecco tastes different from other sparkling wines.
Prosecco will taste much more fruity because you don't have the thing called lees aging. Insert the wine with brioche, biscuity, toasty flavours and aromas, which makes it much more complex.
Here we've got a thing called Journey's End.
Yes.
And would you like to tell us, I've said that people didn't want to splash out on champers. They might want to go the Cap Classique route.
Yes.
What would they be saving? How much might that cost in a shop?
So this one here will cost you about £17. So it is considerably, I guess, better value for money than champagne.
But I'd also comment that it's probably a good deal cheaper than English sparkling wine, which is interesting.
Yes, that is correct.
Now, this second one is called Kleiner Salsa.
It is, yes.
And you told me this is a little more expensive than the first one.
It is.
What price were we talking about here?
About 20.
About 20.
Yes.
Not vastly more.
No.
Are we going to taste £3 worth of improvement? Oh, and by the way, it went so beautifully with the cheese, just as you advised. Are South African sparkling wines, Cup Classique, are they pretty well available in English wine shops, British wine shops?
They are, yes. You can find them in all of the supermarkets. Growing-Beck, and that's on offer at the moment, actually. That's $11.99 from Waitrose, which is exceptional value.
That is insane.
Yes, it is. And you can also, so I bought with me today, so this is a Pinot Noir only, so that's a rosé sparkling.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. It's Good Afternoon Britain. It is 1:26. Now, the government hasn't carried out an impact assessment on their decision to cut winter fuel payments for around 10 million pensioners.
As the Prime Minister travelled to Washington, D.C., Sir Keir Starmer admitted he hadn't been given a report by civil servants on the potential risks or indeed benefits of his party's controversial policy.
This is very interesting, isn't it? Because we were calling for the government, or people were calling for the government, to publish this impact assessment. It turns out there wasn't one.
It's standard practice to produce one. But shall we get to the detail now with the former Labour spokesperson, James Matthewson? James, this is a huge policy. Why on earth wasn't the usual work done behind it?
Yeah, absolutely fascinating, as you both rightly point out. This is the usual process. And the fascinating thing that I'm finding with this is that my conversations with backbench Labour MPs the past couple of days, and even, I mean, because I do regular TV slots like this one and radio and stuff, that, you know, there are mailing lists, which a lot of your viewers might not know, that the party sends out lines, you know, on what it's doing to political commentators to keep them updated. Those lines in the past few days have themselves referenced an impact assessment, you know, and the fact that they may release the impact when there was no impact assessment. So the press office of the Labour team didn't actually know there was an impact assessment, that there was no impact assessment. They presumed there was one. So it just seems like this shows us time and time again with this issue that they've been caught, unfortunately, as they are completely lacking on this issue, because the preparation, the PR, the strategic timing for releasing it, all of it has just gone devastatingly wrong, and it's completely the wrong issue for them to have gotten wrong at this crucial time. So I really do think there is just more and more pressure building on the government from its backbench MPs, from everybody in the Labour Party, to say, you know, we need to try and dilute this in some way, or roll back on it in some way. And they've got the chance to do that in the budget.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's been a shocking lack of internal communication, perhaps misinformation being spread throughout the party. Was there an impact assessment? Now there's no impact assessment. People being told to go on the media and say one thing when another thing is true. Has there been anything on this council tax exemption for single households? Lots of our viewers have been getting in touch, very worried about this. This would impact a lot of widows, widowers, a lot of pensioners, a lot of just single people who probably aren't on huge incomes. Any word on that?
Yeah, it's another thing where I think I've tried to track down, you know, to do my research on where it's come from, what the source is that said that that's a potential. And from the government, other than the official lines that we've had behind the scenes, there has been no detail on it whatsoever. So I don't know if it was a deliberate leak to try and prepare people for that as a potential fact, but it's just going to add insult to injury, isn't it? And to try and kind of hammer home in the same area and potentially double down on something that may affect, because let's not forget, this whole issue with the pensioners and with the winter fuel allowance, single pensioners are some of those who were most disproportionately affected by this because of how pension credit works. So they are less entitled to pension credit because it doesn't proportionately allocate for two people. So couples are better off than single people already. And if this comes in, you know, about council tax, single person exemption, that would be even more of a pressure on those people. So I just don't see the optics of them being able to do it. My hope is that somebody's leaked it to try and see what the reaction is to it. They've seen what the reaction is to it and they'll roll back. But this whole thing, everything in preparation for this budget, just seems to be going topsy-turvy at the moment.
Really, really curious stuff. James Matthewson, thank you so much for joining us and for peeling back the curtain a little bit on how the Labour Party briefs a lot of the people that pop up on the media with not so much the lines to take, but facts that might be useful. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, James is a Labour man. Sorry to talk about James when he's still on the screen. James is a Labour man. Usually he's ready to defend, you know, what the Labour Party are doing. But on this one is really impacting Labour supporters. They don't want to back this. They don't want to back this stuff.
50 Labour MPs didn't vote. Decided that they had better places to be, frankly, than vote for removing the winter fuel allowance for pensioners. I wonder if we're going to see more and more Labour MPs not necessarily vote against the government, but just decide they don't have to be in Parliament on the day of those crucial votes.
Well, exactly. Now, we've got lots more coming up on today's show. We're going to be checking in with our reporter, Charlie Peters, who's been at the sentencing of 7 men, I believe, who've been jailed for a total of 106 years. This relates to the Rotherham grooming scandal. Next.
Very good afternoon to you. It's just after 1:30. As Emily said, plenty more on that breaking news from Rotherham on the grooming gang scandal. But first, a look at the other headlines making the news this hour. Russia has claimed that 6 British diplomats are guilty of espionage and sabotage. But the Foreign Office has said they are completely baseless allegations. The FSB security service claims the diplomats' actions prompted the response amid what it called numerous unfriendly steps by the UK. It comes as the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer meets with President Joe Biden in Washington today to discuss Ukraine's request to use those weapons on Russian soil. Concerns, though, over escalation have delayed the approval for Ukraine's use of the ballistic missiles. Here, what would have been the UK's first coal mine in 30 years is now in legal limbo as planning permissions being quashed by the High Court. Climate campaigners argued the decision to grant planning permission for the Whitehaven coal mine in Cumbria smacked of hypocrisy and said it contradicted the UK's climate commitments. The government had withdrawn its defence, but the developer, West Cumbria Mining, still contested the claim. However, in today's ruling, the judge said giving the go-ahead for the development was legally flawed. The prison population in England and Wales has dropped today by over 2,000. That's in the space of just 1 week following the start of the government's early release scheme. Today's figures are the first to be published since Labour's plans took effect, reducing the number of prisoners to now just over 86,000. Under the scheme, implemented this week, about 1,700 inmates were freed who had served 40% of their sentences. Assisted dying should be allowed in England, according to a panel made up of members of the public. After 8 weeks of debate, the top reasons for support were the need to stop pain and to allow a dignified death for the terminally ill. While 20 of the 28 jury members supported a law change, critics have warned it could be misused and lead to reduced palliative care funding. And Donald Trump says he's done with debating and won't participate in another head-to-head before November's election, despite polls showing Kamala Harris won their first face-off. On Truth Social, Trump boasted about his performance, but several top Republicans said Harris came out on top, with one poll showing 53% of voters agree. Over 67 million people tuned in for the debate, but Harris insists voters deserve a rematch. Those are the latest headlines for now. As I slowly decline in my chair, I will see you in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick look at the markets as they stand just after 1:30. The pound will buy you $1.3135 and €1.1842 euros. The price of gold, £1,955 and 24 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 8,254 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a fine Friday for most of us. Sunny spells, still a few showers around, mostly across parts of Scotland, and perhaps some more prolonged rain turning up by the end of the day because of this frontal system moving in from the Atlantic. But for much of the UK, it's high pressure and sunny skies. The best of the sunshine will be across the Midlands into the south and southwest of England, South Wales, perhaps eastern England as well. Some cloud will build and 1 or 2 showers will develop, most especially for parts of Scotland. Thicker cloud turning up in the far northwest, the breeze picking up as well. It's a cool day out there after a chilly start. Some places were close to freezing first thing, but in any sunny spells with lighter winds compared with the last few days, feeling perfectly pleasant. And it's a decent end to the day for Scotland with plenty of sunny spells. 1 or 2 showers there for Orkney into the far northeast of the mainland, and the cloud thickening by this stage across the Western Isles into parts of western Northern Ireland as well. That's the frontal system I mentioned at the start. But otherwise, clear spells into the evening for much of England and Wales, the cloud tending to fizzle away. And under those clear skies overnight, temperatures will fall again fairly quickly. 1 or 2 mist and fog patches will form. And it's going to be another chilly night, unusually so for the time of year. You don't normally expect temperatures close to freezing overnight in the first half of September. But in main urban areas, I think temperatures will stay at 7 or 8 Celsius. Scotland and Northern Ireland, however, sees the cloud thickening and outbreaks of rain moving in, mostly light and patchy for western Scotland. And for much of Saturday, it's largely dry away from higher parts of western and central Scotland, but it will be cloudy. England and Wales, meanwhile, some decent spells of sunshine and light winds, allowing temperatures to reach 17 to 19 Celsius.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon to you. Hello, I'm Jules Buckley. Westbound M56 is struggling. The limb interchange at junction 9, so off the M6 through towards Stretton at 10. A bridge struck by a vehicle there. A lane closure in place and it's causing queues. Still slow southbound for the M6, Sandbatch 17 to Stoke at 16. Follows an earlier breakdown. All lanes are back open though. There's a breakdown too around Luton on the northbound M1, junction 11 up towards 11A, so a lane shut there. A couple of issues on the M25 clockwise. Firstly, they're ahead at 9 to the M3 at 12. Lane 1 is blocked. It's all due to an earlier condition of that lane closures being lifted. Also queuing clockwise too after Waltham Abbey 26. There was an earlier broken down lorry. There's a breakdown to London bound for the M20. A lane shut away from Ashford at junction 9.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past 1. Now, 7 Rotherham child abusers have been jailed for cumulatively over 100 years after harrowing crimes against girls.
Yes, today's sentencing is the result of a 5-year investigation by the National Crime Agency. This is part of Operation Stovewood.
Well, to get the very latest on this, our national reporter Charlie Peters is live for us at Sheffield Crown Court. Charlie, today what happened?
Well, today the sentences were handed down. The judge briefly refreshed the court on the case, reminding them of some of what we heard during that 9-week trial, which concluded here in June. And he also thanked both of the survivors for being present in court, sat in the jury section underneath the public gallery so they could watch the defendants, all 7, being taken away to lengthy custodial sentences. And then those sentences were handed down. Because there were 7 men and the crimes were so lengthy, the judge, Mr. Justice Slater, had to take a break after delivering 4 to summarise the other 3. Those 7 men sent down today are Mohammed Amar. He was given 14 years imprisonment. Yasser Ajaib, given 6 years imprisonment. Mohammed Zamir Sadiq, 15 years imprisonment. Mohammed Siab, 25 years imprisonment. He had to listen to his sentence being handed down by an Urdu interpreter who sat with him in the dock. When the sentence was handed down, there was an exasperated shock from the public gallery as one member of his family shouted, "I love you, Dad." The judge said he was a persistent and cruel sexual offender. He was 27 at the time of the offending from 2003 onwards. The girl he raped was 11 years old, and she was sat in the court to watch as he was sent down to that shock from the public gallery. And then after a break, Mr. Justice Slater sentenced Abid Sadiq, age 43, to 24 years imprisonment, another lengthy sentence. He said that he was a cunning and determined sexual predator, despite his learning difficulties. He went on to say that he committed these crimes while he was under investigation for a separate set of sex offences. "You knew what you were up to and you continued doing it," was the line from His Honour Judge Michael Slater. And then 2 more had to be sentenced. Tahir Yassin, aged 38, he was given 13 years imprisonment, and Ramin Barry was given 9 years imprisonment, concluding the sentencing hearing at Sheffield Crown Court. And those were for a string of child sexual offences, indecent assault, rape, and also trafficking charges. Some of the details of the harrowing and dehumanising abuse were reassessed in the court and resurfaced in the discussion by the judge, who pointed to them being abused in a cemetery, even behind a nursery, in supermarket car parks, how they were trafficked out of Rotherham, taken to hotels, how in one case, one of the victims, well, just a young teenager, had to jump through the window of one of her abuser's homes to escape. And yesterday at Sheffield Crown Court, I had one of the most moving experiences I've had as a journalist, watching one of those victims deliver her victim impact statement in person, stood at the witness box next to the judge while staring down all 7 defendants who looked left, who looked right, they looked anywhere but towards her, as she described how they had taken her childhood from her. She said, "You stole my childhood, you stole my innocence," but she was taking control now. She said, "22 years ago you groomed me, 10 years ago, I started my fight for justice, and now I am taking your freedom. I am your karma." The second victim had her victim impact statement read out by the prosecuting barrister. She said that she hoped those defendants, now preparing for lengthy jail sentences, would feel as vulnerable and as isolated as she had in the 20 years since the dehumanising and harrowing abuse had taken place.
That is such a brave thing to do as a victim of such horrific crimes, to stand there and give your victim statement in front of 7 men who abused girls of such young ages for so long. Now, this all happened back in the early 2000s, didn't it, Charlie? It's taken this long for justice to be served. Have we had any response from any of the victims or the victims' families on the sentencing?
Not yet, but I expect I'll hear later from one of the survivors who I've met before and who I was expecting to be present in court today to stare down those defendants as the sentences were delivered. But this is part of Operation Stovard, the National Crime Agency's investigation into the historic non-familial abuse that took place in Rotherham from 1997 to 2013. In 2014, the scandal was exposed in a report by Alexis J, a social worker, who found that some 1,400 girls and some boys had been abused in the town by predominantly Pakistani grooming gangs, sex abuse gangs. And she found that many of the authorities involved in investigating did not do so. The local authorities looked the other way for fear of being accused of racist and in order to prioritise community cohesion over justice for girls who were left at the hands of these shocking predators. Now, Operation Stovard was launched in 2014 to really fix what South Yorkshire Police had failed during that period. They've identified some 1,150 victims. They've made over 250 arrests. They've made 38 convictions from their prosecutions. By my count, this is the second biggest set of prosecutions they've achieved. Previously, there was a 13-strong gang, but that was split across 2 different trials due to the size of that gang involved. So there have been some significant steps forward, but some survivors in the town have told me regularly that 38 prosecutions is not nearly enough. We have had some reaction just in the last 15 minutes from the CPS. They said that all children have the right to be safe and protected. They said that these 7 men deliberately preyed on young girls they knew were vulnerable and, using drugs and alcohol, exploited them for their own sexual gratification. And the NCA said that they wanted to pay tribute to the victims who were brave enough to come forward, tell their stories and confront their abusers. That confrontation we saw yesterday. The NCA added, what happened to them can never be undone, but I hope the sentences handed down give them some closure and make them feel as though justice has been done.
Well, Charlie Peters, thank you for that moving report. We'll be back with you, of course, later in the programme as well. I'm looking forward to hearing more from some of those victims. It's a truly Shocking story, and I'm glad that some justice has been done today.
It's hard to listen to that report, actually, just to think of all of those girls who were treated just so despicably for so many years. And now to see that justice has been served, at least for these 7 men that are going down for 106 years in total, appalling to be let down by so many adults at such a young age, you know, the various institutions that are supposed to look after you.
But there was something chilling in what Charlie said as well, though. That the son of one of these monsters, who was convicted for raping an 11-year-old girl, shouted, "I love you, Dad," as he was being sentenced.
Mm.
That suggests to me that this is a wider cultural issue, that perhaps lessons aren't being learnt, that there isn't enough shame that has yet been delivered.
It's just so brave to stand there and deliver your victim statement in the court, staring down 7 men who have abused you and other girls. Well, that was Charlie Peters. Thank you very much indeed from Sheffield Crown Court.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain, and we will be back with more news after the break. We're going to turn to lighter stories, something royal for you.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
With record temperatures expected this week, how do zoos keep their cooler creatures cold? Well, at Yorkshire Wildlife Park, the polar bears are enjoying a vegetable ice block.
Polar bears, they do have quite a variety of different temperatures that they naturally do find. Once they're moving off these polar ice caps, they are in the likes of down in the areas of Canada, Hudson Bay. Naturally, they were finding polar bears in 35-degree temperatures year upon year. So they are very much used to warm temperatures and heat waves as such. What you'll tend to find is they'll go for a good swim and then go for a snooze in the shade thereafter.
Not wanting to miss out, the sea lions are treated to a huge fish lolly.
In the hot weather, it's really important to give them ice because these guys, they don't drink salt water. These pools are actually saltwater pools. They actually drink fresh water. They've got 2 freshwater pools in their house, but again, being able to provide that in their outside enclosure is also really important. So offering them ice with their fish is not only enriching, but it's actually beneficial to their welfare as well.
Other animals like the lemurs will be basking in the sun, but also cooling down with frozen sweet potato.
So we've got 3 different species of lemur here. They come in all different shapes, colours, sizes, but they are native to Madagascar. Madagascar can get quite hot, understandably, so throughout the cold months here in Yorkshire, we do give them a nice heated house all year round, but especially making sure it's nice and warm in the winter for them. And it does mean that in the hot spells as well that we're able to keep our eyes on them and try and give them things that make them a bit more comfortable with that incoming hot weather as well.
The frozen food on offer here certainly has the seal of approval on what could be the hottest day of the year.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets at My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 10 to 2. Now, Prince George has embarked on his first flying lesson at the age of 11. Yes, the future king is the latest in a long line of royal aviators, including his father, Prince William, and even his great-grandfather, Prince Philip.
Yes, his parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales, watched as their son soared into the air from a Berkshire airfield. Prince George takes first flight, future king's first aviation experience. And here we are joined by Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent, to tell us more. 11 years old, is that young to start flying?
Well, it's pretty young, but there's actually no rules against flying at any age, actually. But you can't log in the United Kingdom your flying hours towards your private pilot's licence until you are 14. So clearly, Prince George starting young here. It was first reported in the Sun newspaper. I understand the information in that article is correct, which says that Prince George loved it, according to an onlooker, and it's the right time to start. This is what the onlooker told The Sun. The Prince and Princess of Wales watched him, and it all happens at the Waltham Airfields near Maidenhead in Berkshire, about a 20-minute drive from their home, Adelaide Cottage. And it's actually where his great-grandfather, Prince Philip, learnt to fly back in the 1950s. And clearly there is a huge tradition of males in the royal family learning to fly. We've got Prince William as a helicopter pilot, RAF Search and Rescue to start with, then air ambulance. Prince Charles also learnt to fly in the 1970s, I believe, and of course Prince Philip as well. So Prince George just taking up the tradition.
No, extraordinary that he does it quite so young. And I suppose it gives us a little indication, perhaps, of his future ambitions. Is he going to go off and join the RAF, perhaps?
Well, quite possibly. I mean, you have to remember that one day he's going to be king, and therefore he's going to be head of the armed forces, which would, of course, include the Royal Air Force. I suspect maybe we'll see him do a bit of training with the RAF as he gets older. But there was that article, if you remember, I think it was earlier on this year, which suggested that Prince George may not be forced to go into the British Army or into the armed forces if he doesn't want to. That would be completely going against the tradition of male members of the royal family. Kensington Palace did not comment on that at the time. They're clearly not commenting on it at the moment. But I think cut Prince George some slack here. He's only 11 years old. He's just clearly trying out different things to see what he likes and dislikes. It appears he likes this flying experience aged 11, so we'll have to wait and see. Watch this space when he's a bit older.
We can look forward to lots of opinion pieces, lots of columns in the royal section of the papers on how Prince George is going to be the best ever pilot.
Might be. I mean, clearly, I was a little bit ignorant on this subject when we started the show. We were saying, how on earth can you learn to fly at 11 years old? But Patricia got in touch saying she is a very proud grandmother of a grandson who also started flying at 11 years of age. They take controls too. So she's saying it's not a particularly privileged thing to do, because one of the discussions is, no, I mean, Prince George, of course, very privileged person. This couldn't be within reach of ordinary people, but clearly 11-year-olds do.
Well, I think it depends how much money you've got to spend on all that learning you've got to do, and of course the aircraft itself, hiring the aircraft, the fuel as well. That will cost thousands of pounds if he is going towards his licence. But this could have just been a special treat before Prince George goes back to school, because it happened on Tuesday last week. He went back to school, Lambrook, Wednesday last week. So I think you need some finance behind it. I think you have to be relatively well off in order to afford for your child to learn to fly.
Yes, if you want to be a pilot, you have to invest a lot before you make a good wage after.
Although I know sometimes the airlines can fund that if you're particularly talented.
If you show a talent.
Yeah.
Cameron Walker, thank you very much indeed. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be back with Catherine Forster, who's in Washington.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome along to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. It's turned into a fine day for many of us. Dry, sunny spells. There is some rain turning up later, and that's because of this weather front coming along from the Atlantic, and it's going to push cloud and outbreaks of rain and a freshening breeze into the west of Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland. But for the vast majority, sunny spells through the rest of the afternoon into the early evening, and then any cloud that does appear through the day tends to fizzle out overnight for England and Wales. As a result, temperatures falling away once again. We've got relatively cold air in place, one or two mist and fog patches. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, the thicker cloud here, outbreaks of rain, mean that it won't be quite as chilly, 10 to 12 Celsius. Meanwhile, temperatures could be close to freezing in some parts of central and southern England and South Wales. But that's where we've got the best of the sunshine first thing. A beautiful start to the day. There'll be some high cloud around, but for much of England and Wales, what a cracking start to the weekend. Now, Cumbria, a bit more cloud, and certainly for Scotland and Northern Ireland, it is a cloudier start to the day. That means it's not going to be quite as chilly out there. Temperatures typically in the double figures, but it's fairly dreary over the Highlands, the Grampians, the southern uplands, a lot of low cloud, some patchy rain and drizzle. Brighter skies for the east of Scotland and certainly for much of England and Wales. We keep the dry and bright weather through the day, some areas of medium and high cloud around, but otherwise it's set fair. Western Scotland and Northern Ireland, increasingly breezy, increasingly damp, and as a result it's not going to feel very pleasant as the winds pick up. But further south, a slightly warmer day compared with Friday, highs of 18 to 19 Celsius. And we keep the fine weather in the south into Saturday night, but the weather front that's causing the damp weather in the northwest tends to sink south into northern England and parts of Wales by Sunday. To the north of that, some showers, and to the south, staying fine. Higher pressure next week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's an incredible and good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Friday, the 13th of September. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
War with Russia. Vladimir Putin warns Britain and America allow Ukraine to use their weapons on Russian soil. This would spark a war on the West. The Prime Minister is in Washington, D.C. as we speak. We're there too.
We are indeed, and a coal mine has been quashed. UK's first coal mine in 30 years is now in a legal limbo as planning permission is quashed by the High Court.
Is Trump a scaredy cat? See what we did there? Cats eating them. Right, Donald Trump is running away from another presidential debate with Democratic nominee and Vice President Kamala Harris. This coal mine in Cumbria was a coking coal mine. It wasn't for energy. It wasn't for producing electricity, I should say. It was for producing steel, things like that. It was going to be the cleanest coal mine on the face of planet Earth. And instead of importing a little bit of coal from overseas, where they have big open mines, it would be a covered mine that actually protected a lot of the environment around it, created high-quality jobs, and allowed us to produce our own steel. So, of course, the High Court has said we can't do it.
Is there a dirtier word in modern Britain than coal?
Lawyer.
Very good, very good. I mean, what happens next? Well, we'll find out for you in this next hour, but what happens now? The High Court have said absolutely not. You're not allowed to have this coking coal mine.
Do you know what happens next? The money, the jobs, the investment all goes overseas.
Oh, wonderful. And meanwhile, China continues to build and build and build coal mines. Although they've slowed down, but that's not due to...
China's just done what I think is like not that bad a policy, which is just everything. They're building loads of solar farms, they're building loads of wind farms, they're building loads of coal-fired power stations, gas-fired power stations, nuclear power stations. They're just saying just everything.
OK,
do everything.
It's not an even spread. I mean, it is massively coal and oil.
They are producing more renewable energy than any other country.
I know, but proportionately, coal is still their big hitter.
Coal is still a huge part of their energy mix in a way that it isn't a big part of ours. But, I mean, they've just got an all-in energy policy. They just don't say no to anything. And that's produced huge growth for them. Unfortunately, we do say no to a lot of things, and hence low growth.
Anyway, gbnews.com/your say. Please do get in touch. But it is the news headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you from the newsroom just after 2 o'clock. And the top story this hour, 7 men who committed a string of child sex abuse offences against 2 teenage girls in Rotherham have today been jailed for a total of 106 years. The 7 men were all convicted after a 9-week-long trial at Sheffield Crown Court, which was the result of an investigation by the National Crime Agency called Operation Stovewood. The victims, who were aged between 11 and 16 at the time of those offences, were both in care and were groomed and often plied with alcohol, the court heard, or cannabis before being raped or assaulted. They would often also be collected by their abusers from the children's homes where they lived at the time. Over the course of the hearing at Sheffield Crown Court, the 7 men were handed jail sentences between 7 and 25 years. Russia's claims against 6 British diplomats of espionage and sabotage are completely baseless, according to the Foreign Office. The FSB security service claims the diplomats' actions prompted a response amid what it called numerous unfriendly steps by the UK. It comes as the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is meeting with President Joe Biden this afternoon in Washington to discuss Ukraine's request to use Western weapons. Concerns, though, over escalation have delayed approval for Ukraine's use of ballistic missiles. What would have been the UK's first coal mine in 30 years is now in legal limbo as planning permissions being quashed by the High Court. Climate campaigners had argued the decision to grant planning permission for the Whitehaven coal mine in Cumbria smacked of hypocrisy and said it contradicted the UK's climate commitments. The government had withdrawn its defence, but the developer, West Cumbria Mining, still contested the claim. However, in today's ruling, the judge said giving the go-ahead for the development was legally flawed. The prison population in England and Wales has dropped by over 2,000 in just 1 week. That follows the start of the government's early release scheme. Today's figures are the first to be published since Labour's plan took effect on Tuesday of this week, reducing the number of prisoners now to just over 86,000. That's down from a record of 88,521. Under the scheme, about 1,700 inmates were freed who had served 40% of their sentences. Now, on October the 22nd, it will be the turn of those with sentences of 5 years or more. But the government insists it won't apply to most serious offenders. Robert Jenrick, the leading candidate for the Conservative Party leadership, has proposed to drastically limit the number of migrants entering the country. The former immigration minister told our political editor Chris Hope that he wants to see a cap of just a few thousand people per year. That's if the Conservatives win the next election. He discussed what he called a more controlled approach to immigration on Chopper's Political podcast.
I accept that what I'm arguing for will not be plain sailing. It requires a big change in our economy, in our public services, but it is the right thing to do.
It could get down to thousands, could it? Could it a net figure, thousands?
Well, I think we'd have to give that careful thought. But my point is that it should be in the tens of thousands or lower.
Assisted dying should be allowed in England, according to a panel made up of members of the public. After 8 weeks of debate, a majority of that panel voted in favour.
with the top reasons for support being the need to stop pain and allow a dignified death for the terminally ill. While 20 of the 28 jury members supported a change to the law, critics warn it could be misused and lead to reduced palliative care funding. The findings commissioned by the Nuffield Council on Bioethics could also influence upcoming parliamentary debates, with a bill expected to be heard in November. Two men have been charged after a Banksy painting was stolen from a London gallery. Larry Fraser and James Love were arrested and charged with burglary following that theft. The girl with balloon painting, which partially self-destructed during a £1.1 million auction, was recovered and will be returned to the gallery. Banksy's artwork has recently faced a string of threats, with several pieces moved for safekeeping. The 47-year-old and 53-year-old are expected to appear at Kingston Crown Court next month. The government has struck a £630 million deal to bring part of the National Grid's operations into public ownership. Launching on the 1st of October, the new National Energy System Operator will help drive the UK's transition to clean energy and strengthen energy security. Energy Secretary Ed Miliband's hailing the move as a milestone, which he claims will position the UK as a clean energy superpower. The National Grid, though, said the final price could still change before the deal closes. And finally, Donald Trump says he's done with debating and won't participate in another head-to-head before the November election, despite polls showing Kamala Harris won the first face-off. On Truth Social, Trump boasted about his performance, but several top Republicans said Harris came out on top. Over 67 million viewers tuned in for that first debate, but Harris says voters deserve a rematch. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'll be back with you for one last update in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 9 minutes past 2. Now, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, is drawing new red lines with the West as he warns the UK against escalating the war with Ukraine.
Yes, this as Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is in the United States to talk to President Joe Biden about lifting restrictions on weapons that can be used in the conflict.
Well, it's led to swift reaction from the Kremlin, with 6 British diplomats being expelled by the Kremlin for allegedly spying on Russia.
OK, well, following Sir Keir Starmer on his trip to the United States is our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show. What updates can you give us on the talks that are ongoing?
Yes, hello, Tom and Emily. So, Sir Keir Starmer, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, our National Security Advisor, Tim Barrow, amongst others, will be meeting the outgoing US President Joe Biden this afternoon in the White House. They'll have a meeting of about an hour and a half. We then expect to hear words from the Prime Minister. Following that, there is a huge amount of pressure being brought to bear externally on these leaders over Ukraine. Now, Number 10 are keen to stress that this visit is not only about Ukraine. They say it's broadly to work on shared global challenges, including the Middle East, including the Indo-Pacific, but clearly the situation in Ukraine becoming more and more pressing. We had David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, going with the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to Ukraine earlier this week. Volodymyr Zelensky making it clear that he wants permission to fire British and French-made Storm Shadow long-range cruise missiles into Russia itself. Now, Putin has hit back, saying that if that happens, it would mean that NATO countries are at war with Russia. Now, last night, the Prime Minister, confronted with that by journalists on the plane, said, look, Russia started this war. They can stop it straight away if they want to. We're not expecting an announcement on that today, but it looks like things are shifting in the United States. And Volodymyr Zelensky has been tweeting just in the last few minutes, making it very, very clear what his stance is. He said it's difficult to repeatedly hear, "We are working on this," while Putin continues to burn down our cities and villages. He doesn't need anyone's approval. Putin interprets delays in helping us and in making strong decisions for Ukraine as permission to do whatever he wants. So number 10 will not be drawn on when and if the US will finally give the agreement that we want and need to go ahead with allowing Ukraine to use these weapons. But Volodymyr Zelensky making it very, very plain what he wants and indeed expects.
Well, I wonder if this decision wasn't imminent, would this trip be happening? Catherine, I know you've got your ear to the ground. We'll be following and catching up with you throughout the day here on GB News. Thanks for joining us live from Washington, D.C.
We will indeed, but joining us now is Philip Ingram, a former intelligence officer. Philip, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Big decisions to be made on both sides of the Atlantic.
Well, very much so. And the decisions are late. They should have been made weeks and weeks ago. Every day that these decisions are delayed are hundreds more Ukrainians dying. And they are the front line securing the peace for the rest of Europe and arguably the rest of the world.
Now, this is, of course, a contentious decision. Of course, there have been many people who say, why give these long-range Storm Shadow missiles if you can't use them against the missile launchers that Russia has been using against Ukrainian homes, energy infrastructure, transport, even hospitals? But there are others who say, well, look at what Mr. Putin is saying. He is threatening that if this is allowed, this is in effect an attack by NATO on Russia. He could strike back at NATO countries.
Well, I think President Putin needs a new red crayon. He's drawn so many red lines so far that we have crossed and nothing has happened. He's threatened whenever we started training Ukrainian troops. He threatened whenever we supplied main battle tanks. He threatened whenever we supplied F-16 aircraft. He threatened whenever we supplied ATACMS. This is yet another piece of rhetoric that's coming out of Vladimir Putin. He hasn't got the military wherewithal to escalate and to try and threaten NATO. He knows if he attacked a NATO country, then his military capability would disintegrate in a relatively short period of time. And therefore, all he's got are words, and he's trying to use those words to scare people and scare the decision-making. There's nothing else that's going to come out of this.
And what are Ukraine's intentions with these missiles? They want to be able to use them on Russian territory. What's the aim there?
Yeah, well, Russia has been using the fact that the West hasn't allowed long-range missiles to attack into targets in Russia to put their airfields, their missile launch sites in places where they can attack into Ukraine with impunity, knowing Ukraine can't respond. This will force the Russians to move their capabilities back even further, give the Ukrainians greater notice, therefore, of attacks being launched, and allow the Ukrainians to have their air defences prepared and therefore to protect the civilian targets that Russia seems to attack all of the time. And I think what Ukraine will do is use these weapons, and I think this will be a caveat that will be put on by the UK, the US and France. They'll only use these weapons against legitimate military targets. And President Zelensky has he went to the States last week, I think, with a list of targets that he wanted to get approval for to use these weapons against, and that will give a degree of confidence to Joe Biden and to the Americans.
Well, it will be an absolutely fascinating few days. We'll be looking closely at any decisions that do come out of Washington, D.C. today, although, as we've been discussing earlier on the show, I think it's probably more likely that these things will be used and we'll get the press release afterwards rather than press release and then being used. Philip Ingram, former intelligence officer, really appreciate your time this afternoon on Good Afternoon.
Thank you.
Yes, well, in other news, a landmark shift in public health policy is set to take effect next year. That's as Labour confirms a watershed ban on junk food advertising before 9 o'clock in the evening, with online ads banned entirely.
Extraordinary. This move marks the first in a series of measures aimed at tackling Britain's worsening health crisis and curbing soaring NHS spending, with Sir Keir Starmer pledging further preventative steps. Now, take a look at these pictures on your screens now. We can get them back. We can get them back because these pictures are soon to become illegal on television. Our time of day, will we even be able to show a burger? Will we even be able to show, oh, lovely Smarties?
Ooh, a little
I mean,
Smartie.
enjoy this while you still can. We're a free
donuts.
country for a few days longer, perhaps, but soon all this will be taken from you.
He was dipping a chip into some ice cream there. Some soft whip ice cream, nice looking burger. Oh, I'm getting hungry. It is lunchtime, this show, so, you know, we do without. But we have been out and about today, actually, to see what you outside think about this decision.
I don't think it's a bad idea. I think a lot of children have issues with high sugar content. Also, this food is very cheap. A lot of people can't afford nutritious food for their children. So I don't think it's a bad idea in principle.
I don't think it's going to make a difference. Like, I mean, bans are they're quite okay in terms of they have their purpose, but we're in 2024. I think most of the children, like younger, they have spent times on iPads and iPhones, etc., and parents put them there. So I don't think it will have that much of a difference.
I know there's two ways of looking at it, but to my own feeling is it's got to such a state that somebody has to say something,
I know it's very popular to say that, oh, it's so cheap, all of this fast food is cheap. It's not cheap. What's cheap is buying a bag of carrots for 20p. What's cheap is buying some loose bananas. You can get them for pennies. You can't get a Big Mac for less than £5.
OK, yeah, that's true. And, if you chop up all your vegetables, you can make a hearty stew for 20p.
Some fruit.
20p.
Buy some veg.
But if density of calories, you see. If you get one McDonald's, you get a huge amount of sustenance, don't you?
Yeah, because it's a lot of food.
Carrots,
it's more expensive.
They're going to hit the sides, are they?
Yeah, but
you couldn't live off carrots.
I have lived off carrots. First moved to London, tell you what, rent was through the roof. I wasn't paid very much. I was living off carrots every blooming day.
Baked beans.
Yeah, baked beans, carrots, living life,
Delicious.
student.
Anyway, should we speak to Tom Slater, our guest on this, editor at Spike magazine. Tom, we're just joking about these adverts that will be banned. They'll be confined to the history books in the future. What's this all about, do you think? I mean, Keir Starmer says it's all about saving the NHS. Do you believe him?
No, I think he's just a paternalist and a Puritan. I think that's been made clear not just by this policy, but all the other ones that he's rolled out. When we've been talking in recent weeks about the smoking ban being extended to outdoor smoking areas, the prohibition of cigarettes. They want to do health MOTs in people's workplaces as if you want to be weighed in front of your boss. It's going to be an attractive prospect to many people. And it's worth saying that this particular policy, it's been on the back burner for some time. Both Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak were signed up to this watershed ban for junk food advertising. And it just kept pushing it down the road, not least because it's going to be a hell of a thing to pull off. What is junk food and what isn't? I mean, junk food is often just, it's a kind of class marker a lot of the time. They just think of Big Macs and so on. But even though you can get Pret sandwiches, which are just as calorific. So it's something that's been coming down the pipe for some time. But I think the fact that Starmer has grasped it so gleefully tells you something about his ideology and his view of the world, which is, as I say, very paternalistic.
Here is that when Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, he stood on the steps of Downing Street and said, I will lead a government that treads more lightly on your lives. I mean, he's doing precisely the opposite.
Absolutely. And I think hopefully those words will come back to haunt him in one way, shape or form. I mean, you saw from your Vox Pops there that a lot of these policies, excuse me, individually can be quite popular. But I think we're reaching a point where people are starting to think this is a bit much. We even saw that in response to the pub garden smoking ban, a kind of sense of, is this really tipping from something that's just fair and about other people to just punishing people for their own lifestyles? And I think the problem is this is when you've got a government that doesn't really stand for very much, that doesn't have a lot of vision, which doesn't have a clear sense of where the country needs to go, which I think is very true of this government in many ways. They tend to reach for this stuff in pursuit of a legacy. It gives them a purpose. They give up their responsibilities about managing the country and decide it's their responsibility to manage our lifestyles. So I think because of all of that, we should expect more of this stuff from the Labour Party. The fact that we've seen so much of it already is quite telling, I think.
Yeah, it's also easy. It's an easy lever to pull, isn't it? I mean, a regulation on junk food ads is far easier than dealing with the tremendous backlog in the NHS or reform of the NHS, although to their credit they are at least talking about reform. But yeah, pulling these little regulation levers, so easy.
And it's
lazy.
It's not going to do anything other than stop new entrants. I mean, no one's going to forget that McDonald's exists. If anything, Tom...
That's a good point,
This has the point that it will entrench the big businesses that are already there, but heaven forfend someone new opens a new shop that might compete with the established players. I wouldn't be surprised if McDonald's was in favour of this ad ban, because it keeps the established players in place.
No, absolutely. And also, who really thinks this is going to have any impact, really, if we're talking about children's health? As you say, they're not going to forget that McDonald's exists. They're not going to not walk past the chicken shop on the way home from school, although that's something that they want to get very involved in terms of where fast food outlets can be. I mean, we have a junk food advertising ban on Transport for London, on the tube and the buses and so on. Childhood obesity went up in the 2 years after that ban was brought into place in London. And it led to this absurd situation of Transport for London having to remove even its own advertisements because they had images of cakes in the shape of the Underground logo. So it's one of those things where it doesn't work. It's going to put a lot of burden on industry and block out new entrants. And it also projects such a low view of people that we really do just see a picture of a tantalising treat and must therefore instantly run out and go and get it. And it's not just about children. This is their approach to everyone, I think.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater, editor at Spiked. Interesting, that last comment. This is their approach to everyone.
Yeah, well, adults are going to be banned from smoking entirely soon as well, so...
I mean, it is ridiculous if you're banned from smoking outside a nightclub. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to go for a walk 15 minutes down the road? Oh, you can't do it in a park?
Unless you were born after, 2007, in which case you will never be allowed to buy.
Oh, there's that as well, yes. The incremental, the New Zealand policy.
Which New Zealand then scrapped. We're the only country in the world committing to a prohibition on cigarettes.
My mum, who's watching, just texted me. Oh? She said, you can eat cheaply, ! Lentils, etc. Cheap as chips and filling.
Yeah.
So there you go, she told me.
Buy a sack of potatoes. But potatoes have loads of calories. You put it in the oven, put some cheese in it and some butter. You've got a baked potato done. Potato, carrots, calories, less than £1.
What Mum doesn't know is that I just enjoy arguing with you. Just being contrary. Just being contrary.
That's what makes the show, isn't it? This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's programme. Yes, the new coal-fired power station that was going to be built in Cumbria now struck down. More on that after this.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Meghan Markle is finding it very, very difficult to recruit staff for her lifestyle brand, which is called American Riviera Orchard. There's a mouthful for you. Apart from a jam gifted to influencers earlier this year, the brand is yet to launch any products.
Well, let's speak to our US Royal and Showbiz reporter, Kinsey Schofield. Good morning to you, Kinsey. Who's going to want that gig?
I mean, there are rumors that Netflix has said, allow us to manage the retail strategy. If she can't manage to find a CEO or somebody willing to work with her, Netflix sees an opportunity there.
To be an influencer, people have got to want to be like you. Do people like her?
I mean, this has been her biggest issue in the last few years, is realizing that there's been a shift when it comes to their popularity. Harry and Meghan believed their own hype when they said on that Netflix series that the reason they were ostracized was because they were much more popular than the British royals. They were more popular than Prince William, more popular than Princess Kate. And their popularity has declined immensely. And now they are desperate to win people over again.
Most people have to be liked or admired, and I put it to you, Kinsey, she'll have difficulty on both fronts.
Netflix is not going to renew this contract. I mean, they are fearful that this cooking show, this polo show, will not connect with the audience. And now they want us to believe that Meghan is at home cooking all this banana bread and having her best friend Chrissy Teigen over for scones. People aren't going to buy it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 27 minutes past 2. Now, the decision to approve the UK's first coal mine in 30 years has been thrown out by the High Court.
Yes, climate campaigners, they launched legal action over the plans for the Whitehaven coal mine in Cumbria. They argue the decision to grant planning permission contradicted the UK's climate commitments.
Well, the new Labour government withdrew support for the project, which was approved by Michael Gove back in 2022. The developer, West Cumbria Mining, still contested that claim.
OK, well, joining us now is Shadow Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Business and Trade, Greg Smith. I mean, was this project going to fly in the face of our net zero goals? Is this the only outcome there ever would be?
No, I don't think so. It's incredibly disappointing that the High Court have found as they have today, but actually there's a net result of us not getting coking coal out of our own ground. It's that it's going to have to be imported instead. So everyone that was making all of these claims that it flies in the face of environmental legislation and so on is completely blind to the fact that the carbon footprint is going to go up because of the shipping impacts and of the transportation impacts of bringing coking coal into the United Kingdom from overseas. Now, I know the Labour government is trying to shut down any form of steel production at the moment. From what we saw announced earlier this week for Port Talbot and up in Scunthorpe, they're very scared about job losses too. But it just doesn't make sense. It's like turning off the North Sea oil plan that the last government had. It just means more imports from abroad, which actually means worse environmental impacts.
It is depressing when we compare ourselves to the parts of the world that are actually growing. I mean, I watched the United States presidential debate earlier this week, and both the Democrats and the Republicans were saying, we're going to drill more oil, we're going to extract more natural gas, we're going to also meet climate conditions, but we're going to, have lots of energy production in our country. Whereas we look across to the UK, and the government so far has banned all new licences in the North Sea, scrapped our only coal mine, and continued what was, quite frankly, the terrible policy of the previous Conservative government to not extract any of our own natural gas either. Surely the Conservatives are to blame for some of this too.
Well, look, we'd issued the licences in the North Sea. We'd given planning permission to the mine. And then the fracking debate, I accept, is another one. We've got to use our own resources, in my opinion. And that was a key part of the argument, particularly around the North Sea, because guess what? Even when we get to 2050, there is still going to be a requirement for oil. There is still going to be a requirement for lots of the things that the hardcore environmental lobby just wants to shut down and shut down.
Sorry
yesterday.
to interrupt, but
we don't use our own resources. Isn't
this the fault of, I believe it was the former Conservative leader, Theresa May, who put all this legislation into the statute books, the net zero conditions that we must uphold. So it's very easy for lawyers to then use that legislation to prevent projects like this, because they can argue that this is going to be detrimental to the environment or future environment, and they use our own legal framework to do so.
Yeah, look, the lawyers clearly have done that. The hardcore environmental lobby have clearly found the money to get the lawyers to do those acrobatics and dance on the heads of those pins. But as I said, even when we get to 2050, there will still be a need and a requirement for oil. 2050 and the legislation that was passed doesn't mean oil suddenly gets stopped being used, full stop, period, forevermore. There will still be lots of things that need oil and natural gas going on from that date. So it brings me back full circle to the start of the argument. What are we going to do? Are we going to use our own resources? Or, as Labour seem to want to do, import them all?
Now, of course, Greg, the Labour Party is getting away with a lot of stuff without all that much opposition at the moment. Your party is embroiled in what is a very, very long leadership contest. You're supporting one of the contenders who is through to this final four stage that we're going to see an almost beauty parade of these candidates at the party conference in a couple of weeks. Why are you supporting James Cleverly?
So I've known James a very long time. I actually think he is best placed to unite our party. When I was on the doorsteps in my constituency over the general election, the number one thing that came up, of course, people had individual policy gripes about GP appointments or potholes or immigration or whatever it may have been. But the number one gripe was you lot are fighting amongst yourselves. You're not united. The coalition that is the Conservative Party and its various wings has fractured and can't work together anymore. And I think James is best placed to unite all wings of that coalition, the Conservative Party, and bring us together. Because if we don't unite, frankly, we're going to go backwards and we're not going to be able to start that process of re-earning the right to be heard by the British public. But James is also, he's given some superb speeches in recent weeks that has really sung to what I might call my brand of conservatism. The examples he's given, going back to the growth point about the way places like Canary Wharf or the Olympic Park or what's happened in Teesside have actually happened. It's because the state's got out of the way, because we've had less regulation, we've deregulated, we've let businesses get on with it. And that sings to my version of how you get economics to work, how you get growth in this country.
Okay,
and hopefully
so he's free market oriented, is James Cleverly. Thank you so much, Greg Smith. Always great to speak to you, Shadow Parliamentary Under Secretary and Trade.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's show. We're going to be talking to Charlie Mullins, the millionaire plumber who's now quitting the UK in light of these expected tax rises. That's after your news.
Tom, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories. First to some breaking news from Sunderland, where a man has become the first person convicted for rioting in the city during the recent UK-wide unrest. Kieran Usher admitted to charges at Newcastle Crown Court after CCTV captured him leading violence during the Sunderland riots on the 2nd of August. All footage showed the 32-year-old masked throwing missiles at police and inciting others to join in. The violence caused significant damage to local businesses and forced police to briefly retreat. Next to another breaking line that we're just hearing now, that the presenter Jay Blades, best known for his role on the BBC's The Repair Shop, has been charged with controlling and coercive behaviour against his estranged wife. Court documents have revealed his charges include physical and emotional abuse. The 54-year-old appeared in court this morning and he'll appear in court again on the 11th of October. In other news, 7 men who had committed a string of child sex abuse offences against 2 teenage girls in Rotherham have been jailed for a total of 106 years. The men were all convicted after a 9-week trial at Sheffield Crown Court, which was the result of an investigation by the National Crime Agency called Operation Stovewood. The victims, who were aged between 11 and 16 at the time of the offences and were both in care, were groomed and often plied with alcohol or cannabis before being raped or assaulted. They would often be collected by their abusers from the children's homes where they lived at the time. Russia's claims against 6 British diplomats of espionage and sabotage are completely baseless, according to the Foreign Office. The FSB security service claims the diplomats' actions prompted them to be expelled from Moscow amid what it called numerous unfriendly steps by the UK. It comes as the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer meets President Joe Biden in Washington to discuss Ukraine's request to use Western weapons on Russian soil. Concerns over escalation have delayed approval for Ukraine's use of the ballistic missiles. And what would have been the UK's first coal mine in 30 years is now in legal limbo, as planning permissions been quashed by the High Court. Climate campaigners argued the decision to grant planning permission for the Whitehaven coal mine in Cumbria smacked of hypocrisy and contradicted the UK's climate commitments. The government had withdrawn its defence, but developer West Cumbria Mining still contested the claim. However, in today's ruling, the judge said giving the go-ahead for the development was legally flawed. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a fine Friday for most of us. Sunny spells, still a few showers around, mostly across parts of Scotland, and perhaps some more prolonged rain turning up by the end of the day because of this frontal system moving in from the Atlantic. But for much of the UK, it's high pressure and sunny skies. The best of the sunshine will be across the Midlands into the south and southwest of England, South Wales, perhaps eastern England as well. Some cloud will build and one or two showers will develop, most especially for parts of Scotland. Thicker cloud turning up in the far northwest, the breeze picking up as well. It's a cool day out there after a chilly start. Some places were close to freezing first thing, but in any sunny spells with lighter winds compared with the last few days, feeling perfectly pleasant. And it's a decent end to the day for Scotland with plenty of sunny spells. One or two showers there for Orkney into the far northeast of the mainland, and the cloud thickening by this stage across the Western Isles into parts of western Northern Ireland as well. That's the frontal system I mentioned at the start. But otherwise, clear spells into the evening for much of England and Wales, the cloud tending to fizzle away. And under those clear skies overnight, temperatures will fall again fairly quickly. One or two mist and fog patches will form. And it's going to be another chilly night, unusually so for the time of year. You don't normally expect temperatures close to freezing overnight in the first half of September. But in main urban areas, I think temperatures will stay at 7 or 8 Celsius. Scotland and Northern Ireland, however, sees the cloud thickening and outbreaks of rain moving in, mostly light and patchy for western Scotland. And for much of Saturday, it's largely dry away from higher parts of western and central Scotland, but it will be cloudy. England and Wales, meanwhile, some decent spells of sunshine and light winds, allowing temperatures to reach 17 to 19 Celsius.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello to you. I'm Jules Buckley. Issues both sides of the M6 this Friday at lunchtime. Northbound from the M62, the Croft interchange 21A up toward Newton Le Willows. That's junction 22. There's a breakdown blocking a lane, causing delays. Both sides of the M6 are currently closed from Middlewich 18 to Sandbach 17. There's emergency repairs underway, naturally queuing either side. The A1 in Stamford in Rutland, the Great North Road, that is closed from the Tittencote turn-off up towards Stamford. Big queues for a police incident. Northbound M1 around Luton, 11A, still queuing back towards junction 11, follows an earlier bump, all lanes back open, and queues in 2 lanes shut clockwise M25. St Albans 21A to junction 22, there's been a collision causing queues. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
OK, 2:40 is the time. We've got plenty more coming up on today's show, including an interview with none other than Charlie Mullins of Pimlico Plumbers. But it is Martin Dobney up next at 3 o'clock. Martin, what have you got for us?
Great show, guys. Well, today we'll be crossing to Donald Trump's golf course in Los Angeles. He's given his first press release since that bruising TV debate with Kamala Harris. No doubt he'll be taking swings at her. Hopefully won't mention what's on the menu. Hopefully not cats and dogs. Also, everybody loves a story about neighbours at war. Today we've got an astonishing story of a couple from East Sussex who were banned from even looking into their neighbour's property for 11 years. They won in court the other day because they claim they were merely praying on the beach. You couldn't make it up. They'll be on my show exclusively live later on for a lovely bit of Neighbours at War. Come in 3 till 6.
Well, looking forward to it. We'll tune in from 3.
We will indeed. But first, Britain's richest plumber, Charlie Mullins, has revealed his plans to leave the United Kingdom, citing high taxes under the new Labour government.
Well, after paying £120 million in taxes over his lifetime, the millionaire entrepreneur says he won't let any more of his wealth go to the Treasury.
Yes, Mullins, who sold Pimlico Plumbers for £145 million, he plans to move his assets to Spain and Dubai, where he believes ambition is better rewarded and appreciated.
Well, delighted to say he's joining us now in the studio, founder of Pimlico Plumbers, Charlie Mullins, OBE. Charlie.
Hi, Tom. Hi.
You're quitting Britain. Is this not a bit unpatriotic of you?
Well, you can call it what you want, but I'm just not. I'm moving abroad to protect my assets for my family. I mean, you know, they're going to increase inheritance tax, going to increase capital gains. You know, it's just destroying Britain. It's just not practical no more to be here. And, you know, I've paid, they say, over 100 mil into the system. And I'm afraid to say that, you know, Starmer is just driving away sort of investors, entrepreneurs, even just normal people that are on 100k or 150k, they also want to leave. It's the wrong way to go about it. And unfortunately, they're very anti-business. You know, maybe we was better off with the Conservatives then, if I'm being honest, because at least they didn't have all this increase in taxes and the workers' rights that, you know, I'm pretty sad to be leaving, if I'm being honest. I mean, it's quite a big decision, but, you know, I'm no longer prepared to keep putting into the system and let them waste it.
Now, the tax burden was pretty shocking under the Conservatives as well. Were you considering it before this Labour government came into power?
Not at all, no.
No, so you were going to stay here, all your plans were to stay in the United Kingdom. It is since Starmer got into power and the fear of the budget, what's coming?
Look, of course, Conservatives have done a lot of damage over the years, but I just feel that Labour are going to make it worse and just make it not practical to live here anymore. I've already invested in a new business here, a family business, similar to the one before. But, you know, I'm not going to be on the payroll. I'm not going to be involved other than, you know, my expertise. I'm just not prepared to give the government any more of my money, you know, and be treated the way we're treated, you know.
I mean, it is extraordinary looking at all of the rumours. None of this is confirmed yet, but pretty much every financial analyst will tell you that the budget is likely to raise, perhaps even double, capital gains tax. Now, it's only paid by about 5% of people, but the people that pay it are the people who create the jobs.
That's right.
The people who create the wealth, the people who invest in businesses. Now, if we go from 20% capital gains tax to 40% capital gains tax, there are going to be a lot more people potentially following your lead.
Well, you're totally right there. And I mean, what's quite annoying is the Labour government are denying that people are leaving. They've been moving their money out for 6 months. They're leaving left, right and centre. And it will continue to happen that way. And he's coming up with, he thinks that, the UK is the best place to invest in business. I mean, he should do that on oath because that ain't right.
That's what he said in response, or at least the Number 10 spokesperson said that when it was put to them that you were going to be leaving this country. That's what they said. Oh, no, Britain is the best place in the entire world to do business.
We've got millionaire emigration.
Yeah.
The only countries that have more millionaire emigration than the UK are China and Russia.
Now, look, as I say, we're not in a good position as it is, but these will absolutely destroy the economy. The country go bankrupt, and I think we'll be in recession very soon. And, you know, I've been speaking to different billionaires and millionaires over the last week, and they're already gone. There's Alfie Best gone to Monaco. There's other people that are leaving, Dubai, Italy, anywhere but the UK, because they just don't know how to look after people that are contributing to the economy.
And landlords are selling up as well, pretty near to record rates. Lots of new regulation coming their way too. People with assets may well be targeted come this. But what do you think of all this talk of this £22 billion financial black hole, this is being used as the justification to scrap the winter fuel payments, to slap taxes on wealth creators and people with investments and the like. Have they actually managed to talk down the country so badly that now this is the reason why 9,500 millionaires might leave the country this year?
Yeah, undoubtedly. Look, I mean...
They stuffed this up.
They're using the black hole thing as if it's never been there, but they say that 9 billion of that is down to pay rises and costs of the civil service. The fact that what they're doing to the pensions, I think that's the final straw. I mean, you know, how disrespectful is that? They're paid into the system all their life, and they're I mean, it's just like the new Robin Hood style, isn't it? It's robbing everybody to feed the migrants and the illegals.
It is extraordinary, given that we have been here before as a country. We had net emigration until the 1980s. Then we became a pro-business country. We saw Canary Wharf rocket up into the sky. We saw businesses like yours create wealth and jobs. We stood on our own 2 feet in the world again. Do you think that we might be going back to those sort of dark days before the 1980s, before the wealth creation boom, where people used to more leave this country than come into it?
Yeah, well, undoubtedly. I mean, I think they've increased the tax rate there for the highest earners. A lot of people that went to America that, you know, had good money or was earning good money. Undoubtedly, we were going backwards. I mean, the best times we had was when Margaret Thatcher was in there, and as she says, you know, we're going to run out of money, the socialists will run out of money, other people's money, not their own.
I mean, when Keir Starmer stood up and said things are going to get worse before they get better, I thought there's going to be a lot of people with means who think, well, I don't want to stick around to see how worse it's going to get. Thank you very much indeed. Charlie Mullins, OBE, founder of Pimlico Plumbers.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain, although it feels like bad afternoon.
Yeah, sorry about that.
We're going to try and get some more positive stories coming for you. Curious one coming up next. Is Donald Trump a bit of a scaredy cat about refusing a third debate?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Did you know several Paralympic GB track and field athletes aim to go for gold this summer in Paris? So aside from pure talent, a British firm has incorporated, get this, space technology in the materials of running clothes to help athletes perform at their ultimate capacity. I'm not sure if I believe this, but we'll find out in a sec. Trailblazing scientists, engineers and designers at British firm Rheon Labs have taken an idea first used in a NASA project, and they've now developed it for over 15 years at Imperial College in London.
First of all, please can you explain to us a bit more about how and what this incredible technology is?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, our founder, Dr. Dan Plant, spent many years developing these kind of dynamic materials. That means they behave in what's called non-Newtonic way. So they don't follow the rules. Effectively, they can change their behavior depending on kind of stress or stretch you apply to it. So what you get on an athlete level, if you imagine you have a garment, it's supercharged. It's such that the garment changes its support depending on your movement or your activity or the speed at which you run.
So you're saying that it generates, what, more sort of kinetic energy, is that right?
Not quite. It makes you effectively make more out of your own energy. Spot the athletes with the wavy curves and stripes, you'll see that. So that's super polymer we have in combination with these stripes that are kind of built around the way your muscles moves.
You said the difference between first and fourth place is a fraction of a percent.
Yeah, that's the very main difference it makes. So even if you manage to kind of make more of your own energy and improve your performance by 1%, that's the difference between podium and non-podium.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 3, and we're going to turn stateside now, because the former president and now contender Donald Trump is refusing to debate his opponent Kamala Harris once more.
So is he a scaredy cat? Joining us now is Deputy Editor at The Spectator, Freddie Gray. Is he running scared?
No, I think it's probably the fair answer. I think one can fairly say quite a lot of negative things about Donald Trump, but I think scaredy cat is not one of them. I mean, this is a man who was shot through the ear and then stood up and started shouting, fight, fight, fight. So I don't think he's a coward. I think the question is whether it's a tactical mistake for him to shun another debate, if indeed a sincere offer of another debate is on offer. I think I can see why he isn't doing it. It sounds a bit like whining, and it is when he says that the debate was unfair. But it was unfair. The moderators repeatedly fact-checked him on various things, and they didn't fact-check Kamala Harris, who talked a lot of porkies too. I think the reason why it might be a mistake, however, is that Trump has in the past tended to do better in second debates, and he couldn't have done much worse than in the first debate. But the election is very tightly poised. I think even though a large number, 67 million, I think it was, people watched that debate, I'm not sure it's going to have much of an impact on the polls, because even though there's a number of independents in America, a large number of independents, I don't think we're at a stage yet with Donald Trump and the sort of the sheer divisiveness of American politics where that many people will be swayed by a debate, particularly because they're both talking in completely different realities. Donald Trump does talk a lot of nonsense. There's no point denying that. But Kamala Harris talks complete nonsense too. So debates, presidential debates, as things are in the current political climate, are sort of pointless.
And yet it was Donald Trump's opportunity to define his opponent, an opponent that not many Americans know much about, an opponent who, of course, has flip-flopped on everything from defunding the police to banning fracking to banning plastic straws. One of my favourite things about visiting America is that you can actually drink a drink through a straw. Anyway, Freddie, he failed, frankly. He failed to pin her down, and she was better trained.
Yes, it was his debate to win, really, and hers to lose, and he didn't win and she didn't lose. He wasn't terrible. It wasn't a Biden-esque meltdown, if you watch the whole thing. But he didn't land any blows. And probably the most crucial moment was where he got baited into a silly rant about the size of his rallies by Kamala Harris. And the actual question that he was responding to was about immigration, which should be his strongest suit. So he was bad, but he was incredibly bad against Hillary Clinton in 2016. Because I'm such a nerd, I rewatched it before the debate. And he was really bad that night. I'd say worse, possibly, than he was on Tuesday night. And yet he won that election.
So it sounds like you think it's still all to play for. It's all to play for. But Freddie, we're going to have to leave it there because we've come to the end of the show. Very disappointing.
Very well.
But Freddie Gray, as always, great to speak to you.
I've been cut off by the moderators.
You have.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, no bias.
We'll mute
no
your
bias.
microphone. There we go.
Thank you for watching Good Afternoon Britain. Sorry to cut off Freddie there, but them's the breaks.
Them's the breaks. Martin Daubney is, of course, up.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome along to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. It's turned into a fine day for many of us. Dry, sunny spells. There is some rain turning up later, and that's because of this weather front coming along from the Atlantic, and it's going to push cloud and outbreaks of rain and a freshening breeze into the west of Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland. But for the vast majority, sunny spells through the rest of the afternoon into the early evening, and then any cloud that does appear through the day tends to fizzle out overnight for England and Wales, As a result, temperatures falling away. Once again, we've got relatively cold air in place, 1 or 2 mist and fog patches. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, the thicker cloud here, outbreaks of rain, mean that it won't be quite as chilly, 10 to 12 Celsius. Meanwhile, temperatures could be close to freezing in some parts of central and southern England and South Wales. But that's where we've got the best of the sunshine first thing. A beautiful start to the day. There'll be some high cloud around, but for much of England and Wales, what a cracking start to the weekend. Now, Cumbria, a bit more cloud, and certainly for Scotland and Northern Ireland, it is a cloudier start to the day. That means it's not going to be quite as chilly out there. Temperatures typically in the double figures, but it's fairly dreary over the Highlands, the Grampians, the southern uplands, a lot of low cloud, some patchy rain and drizzle. Brighter skies for the east of Scotland and certainly for much of England and Wales. We keep the dry and bright weather through the day, some areas of medium and high cloud around, but otherwise it's set fair. Western Scotland and Northern Ireland, increasingly breezy, increasingly damp, and as a result it's not going to feel very pleasant as the winds pick up. But further south, a slightly warmer day compared with Friday, highs of 18 to 19 Celsius. And we keep the fine weather in the south into Saturday night, but the weather front that's causing the damp weather in the northwest tends to sink south into northern England and parts of Wales by Sunday. To the north of that, some showers, and to the south, staying fine. Higher pressure next week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You can beat. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions
that raises more questions than